The harbor city of Pentos shimmered under the sun, all baked pale stone and flapping banners above its crenellated walls. At a glance, it might have seemed a jewel of the Associ coast, though to Daenerys Targaryen's eyes it was another cage. However gilded, she stood on a high balcony, leaning upon the balustrade, letting the sea breeze catch at her silver-pale hair. It carried with it the brine of the narrow sea, and the faint bitterness of fishnets and old wood. If she were to tilt her head just so, she could imagine seeing over the water, all the way to Westeros, the home she had never truly known but was meant to claim. For years, she had been told she was born to be queen of the Seven Kingdoms, yet here she was, staring out at them from afar. She breathed in deeply and turned away from the balcony, letting the large, airy chamber come back into focus. Her brother Viserys was pacing near an ornate table. His footsteps sounded brittle on the marble floors. His restlessness never seemed to end. He wore garments more suited for a lesser merchant prince than a rightful king, though he always insisted on being draped in something that recalled their Targaryen lineage. The color black, stiff with a red trim that was supposed to remind others of dragons. But the cloth looked worn, and the red thread did not gleam half as brilliantly as he believed it did. Daenerys crossed the room with measured steps, every motion suffused with a serenity that belied her inner turmoil. "It is not too late to reconsider," she said to him softly, her voice as delicate as a velvet glove. "We don't even know if these envoys from the north are sincere. Perhaps they've traveled far, but that does not guarantee they speak in good faith." Viserys whirled around, pale hair falling into his eyes. Frustration furrowed his brow. "We can't afford to second-guess every gesture, dear sister," he replied, the words coming out as a hiss. "If they are offering alliance, we must seize it. I am the dragon, and dragons do not wait for scraps. If the North wishes to kneel at my feet, it is a boon for our cause." Daenerys shifted on her feet. The silence in the chamber hung thick for a moment, broken only by distant gulls and the tolling of some unseen bell in the city. Across the room, Illyrio Mopatis, the magister who had so graciously given them shelter, was picking at a tray of figs, watching the siblings from beneath hooded lids. He had arranged the meeting between the Targaryen exiles and the envoys from Westeros. But these were not envoys from the southern lords, no Lannister or Tyrell or Martell. They were from the north, a place of snow and ancient gods, fierce loyalty and grim-faced men. Something about it left Daenerys unsettled. Westeros felt intangible enough in her dreams, and the north seemed a far stranger land still. She remembered the murmured stories told by sailors passing through the free cities, how the cold winds in the north howled with more than mere winter's breath, how shadowy tales of white walkers and undead stirred in the deep night. She was not sure she believed in such legends, but the thought of forging a bond with the men of the north, sight unseen, made her chest tighten with anticipation and a twinge of fear. Viserys continued pacing, glancing every so often at the double doors that led to the wide hall. "Where are they?" he muttered. "They should have arrived by now. They think they can keep a dragon waiting." Illyrio's soft voice emerged from behind a half-chewed fig. "Patience, my lord. Men who travel such a distance cannot simply appear at your beck and call. They are guests after all, and in Pentos we treat guests with courtesy." He licked his fingers, setting the remains of the fig aside. "It will be a moment yet. The roads around the outskirts of the city are crowded with caravans. I've sent a small escort to retrieve them." "Dabramanin." Viserys made a dismissive sound in his throat. Daenerys said nothing, but her heart quickened at the thought of this meeting. In truth, she wanted to know more about the land she was meant to rule, and especially the north, the place so often overshadowed by southern politics. She allowed herself a small exhale, calming her nerves. A swirl of memory drifted across her mind, recalling the narrow bedchamber she had grown up in, the whispered tales of her heritage. She had always felt more like a child of Essos than Westeros. Foreign and homeless all at once. When at last a rap sounded on the doors, everyone in the room turned. Hamtashi's servant opened them wide, and in came 3 figures. Leading them was a bearded man, tall and broad in the chest, clad in leather and heavy wool despite the heat of the coastal city. His face was weathered, his gaze piercing. Behind him stood a woman just as lean, with a short crop of dark hair, and a younger man with sharp eyes that flicked around the chamber. Daenerys' hand, unconsciously, pressed against the brooch at her collar, a silver ornament shaped like a dragon's head. Her breathing felt shallow, and she forced herself to stand a little taller. The North had arrived. How strange to see them here, so far from their icy domain. She wondered what they saw when they looked at her. An exiled princess? A mere girl? Viserys cleared his throat, stepping forward. There was an eagerness in his stance, but also a thinly veiled arrogance. "You come with word from the North?" he asked, trying to summon regal authority, but it came out too close to desperation. The tall man inclined his head in a short bow, but he never took his eyes off them. "My name is Roderick Castle," he said in a deep, calm voice, one that spoke of countless nights spent around winter hearths. "Steward of House Stark of Winterfell. These are my companions, Hallis Mullen and Jella Flint." The two behind him gave curt nods. Viserys's expression flickered. "Steward to House Stark, you say? So you serve?" "We serve the Lord of Winterfell," Roderick interrupted gently, though the slight edge in his voice gave away a glimmer of pride. "The North, you might have heard, has its own ways, a certain independence from the southern courts. We have come here at our Lord's behest, and we bring with us a proposal." Daenerys felt Illyrio's eyes darting between them all, measuring the moment. She could not help but admire the northern man's composure. He looked around slowly, as if to remind the Targaryens that they were meeting on foreign soil, at a time that might not entirely favor them. Viserys forced out a breath, trying to regain the upper hand. Yes, Lord Eddard Stark, if I recall. The one they call Ned. So he has recognized the rightful king in exile. He wishes to declare for House Targaryen as is proper. Roderick's lips twitched. He wishes to discuss matters that concern all of Westeros, not just the North. But the wolf does not bend the knee lightly, my lord. We have come to see if we can treat with you. Certain events in the North have led us to reevaluate alliances. We have reason to believe the realm would be stronger under a certain vow of cooperation. Behind him, Jella Flint kept silent, but Daenerys noted the sharpness in her eyes. Hallis Mullen shifted on his feet, glancing about at the ornaments and gold that Illyrio had so flauntingly placed in the room. Then Roderick's gaze slipped over to Daenerys, and he paused. His eyes softened just slightly as they took in her delicate form. She felt the intensity of his stare, but would not look away. Something in his demeanor told her he was studying her, assessing her beyond her name or her claim, searching for the strength that might lie beneath. And in that fleeting moment, Daenerys sensed a respect that Viserys' brashness could not command. Illyrio stepped forward with a host's fluid grace. "Come, friends. We need not stand on ceremony all day. Pentos can be quite humid even this early in the season." He gestured to a table where jugs of wine and goblets of hammered metal waited. "Let us sit, refresh ourselves, and speak of these matters with clear heads." Viserys gave a curt nod, moving to the table. Daenerys followed in his wake, her silken skirt whispering around her ankles. Illyrio busied himself pouring wine while the three northerners found seats. Roderick Castle remained outwardly calm, but Daenerys did not miss the small frown he wore as he looked at Viserys. Perhaps he had expected something else. Perhaps he had expected a man of commanding presence, instead of one who paced around anxiously, quick to anger. They sipped wine. The pentagonal windows of the chamber let in thick beams of sunlight. Dust motes shone in the air, swirling whenever a breeze wandered through. Daenerys took a seat not directly beside her brother, but slightly apart, making sure she had a clear view of all. Viserys set his goblet down with a bit too much force. "Let's get on with it," he demanded. "Speak plainly. I grow weary of traveling minstrels and half-spoken intentions." Roderick Castle exchanged a glance with his comrades, then leaned forward, resting his broad arms on his knees. "Lord Stark sent us to speak to House Targaryen because of a danger in the north that threatens all of the 7 kingdoms. My lord believes that some of the old tales are stirring. There are signs, reports from the Night's Watch, rumors carried by free folk, of strange happenings beyond the wall, things that might be dismissed as children's stories, but in the north, We have learned to heed such warnings. We cannot stand alone against it if it proves true. We need unity, and we need allies prepared to face a threat unlike anything we have known in living memory. Nabd. As the words sank in, Daenerys felt a peculiar chill course through her veins. At odds with the warm day, there was a conviction in Roderick's voice that told her these were not trifling rumors. But she was uncertain how this might serve House Targaryen. If the North sought an alliance, presumably they needed soldiers and help from whatever lords might rally behind the Targaryen name. But she herself had nothing. No armies, no wealth. Only her Targaryen blood. And what of her dragons? She had none. Only the old hushed stories that said the blood of the dragon still coursed through her veins. Viserys gave a short laugh, leaning back in his chair. So, your lord is chasing fairy tales in the snow. And for that you have traveled across the sea to me? He looked at them incredulously. Because you fear the others, or the White Walkers, or some nonsense like that. Roderick bristled but maintained a forced politeness. Lord Stark does not fear shadows. He is not prone to flights of fancy. But if the stories hold even a kernel of truth, we have cause to worry. The Night's Watch is dwindling, and the realm is busy squabbling over other matters, kingly matters, alliances, taxes. None look north to see what might be creeping closer. My lord aims to secure friends who will not dismiss these warnings. Why come to us then? Daenerys asked quietly, drawing their attention. She was surprised by how firm her voice sounded. House Targaryen is in exile. We have no armies, no fleet to speak of. The usurper Baratheon sits the Iron Throne. The lords of the realm abide by his rule. She forced herself to breathe steadily. How do you expect we could help you stand against a threat like that, if indeed it is real? Roderick inclined his head slightly. Because, Princess, we do not know how the South will respond. Lord Stark has reason to believe that King Robert's hatred for Targaryens blinds him. The threats to the north might go unanswered if we rely on the Iron Throne. The king in the south might laugh at any mention of White Walkers, if he even listens at all. So, if House Targaryen wishes to return, the north might be receptive. A pledge of support. We have loyal men. A cause. If this threat is real, it may spur other houses to rally too. If House Stark stands behind the Targaryen claim, it could be the impetus for your return. Should we unite and face the cold darkness together, House Stark would have a strong ally in King's Landing once the war is won. My lord knows we cannot fight alone, nor can you. No. Daenerys' chest tightened. The possibility sounded almost too good. She flicked a glance at Viserys, who was now gazing at Roderick with an intensity that bordered on hunger. She knew her brother's mind well enough. The North's loyalty might be the stepping stone to the Iron Throne, the golden dream that haunted him day and night. A dream he was willing to see, realized no matter how many bones it required. And yet a quiet, persistent worry gnawed at her. The North's alliance would not come without cost. They would want something from House Targaryen. Protection, aid, or perhaps some promise. Maybe the marriage bed. She could not help but remember how Viserys had once pledged her to Khal Drogo, in hopes of gaining an army of Dothraki. Had Illyrio's manipulations not intervened, she might have been sold off like a broodmare. That same fate might await her here, though she sensed the North was not like the Dothraki, nor were they quite like these merchant princes. They had honor, at least. But honor sometimes demanded its own sacrifices. Viserys drummed his fingers on the table. If we come to terms, he said, and the Stark fosters my claim to the throne, you say you will bring me your men, your swords, your steel. Roderick's mustache twitched. It is possible. My lord does not speak lightly of war. But if the realm is truly threatened, we will do what we must to protect our people. The realm might need a Targaryen on the throne if Robert Baratheon will not rise to the challenge of the North's danger. It is not a matter of personal whim. It is about the future. All of our futures. No. In the hush that followed, Daenerys' fingertips traced the rim of her goblet, collecting droplets of condensation. She could feel her brother's impatience, practically see him wanting to shout that, of course he was the rightful king, that they had only to kneel. But she also recognized the subtle posture of the Northerners. They were not here to kneel. They were here to negotiate, to measure the Targaryens, to see if an alliance was wise, if it would benefit the North. Before Viserys could rattle off demands, she spoke again, gently, but clearly. Why now? Why travel so far to see us instead of forging an alliance with one of the other claimants, or with King Robert himself if you desire protection? Roderick's eyes flicked to her. Because if these old evils truly stir, we have no time for the petty hatred that grips King Robert. And we have not forgotten that once, long ago, the Targaryens united the Seven Kingdoms. Yours is a name that still carries weight. My lord thinks that if a Targaryen were to return to Westeros under a banner of unity and defense, hearts might be swayed more easily than if we tried to bend the current king's ear. Robert Baratheon would see only vengeance for your father's crimes. He might do more harm to our cause than good. He might squander the realm's energy on continuing a grudge rather than facing the threat beyond the wall. Not true. Daenerys' heart panned at the reminder of her father, the Mad King, the cause of so much grief and war. She had never known him, yet she bore the burden of his name, and it had cost her a home, a family, everything. But hearing the mention of uniting the realm under Targaryen rule stirred something within her. Could she bring the kingdoms together where her father once drove them apart? Viserys sniffed, as if bored with their talk. Very well. I see that we have a common understanding of necessity. My sister and I will consider your proposal. But first, you must prove the North's sincerity. Can you offer any guarantee that your master truly means to name me king? I will see what to me. Roderick's composure was unshaken. I cannot speak fully for my lord. He will not so easily name you king unless you show yourself worthy of that crown. My instructions are to carry out a first meeting, to see if we can find common ground. In truth, our request is that you come north, in secret or in force, to meet Lord Stark. That is the next step. Dei. We can accomplish little at this table in Pentos. If you have any doubt, come see the lands you wish to rule. Come see the men you wish to lead. At that, Viserys let out a harsh laugh. You wish me to put myself in the hands of Eddard Stark? The very man who helped the usurper slaughter our kin? That's what you would have me do? Roderick did not flinch, but Daenerys saw pain flicker across his features. Lord Stark did only what he believed he must to end your father's tyranny. But I tell you now, the Lord of Winterfell is an honorable man. He will not betray you if you come under guest right. If you desire the throne, you must put aside old grudges, or we will all perish if the threat in the north proves true. My lord does not harbor a savage hatred for the Targaryens. He despised the cruelties your father inflicted on the realm. But if you wish to save that realm, if you wish to wear that crown, come to Winterfell. Speak with him face to face. See with your own eyes what creeps beyond the wall. Nasht. Silence settled over the chamber for a long moment, thick with tension. Daenerys breathed slowly. Winterfell. She had heard the name many times, where the Starks had held dominion for centuries, stoic as the cold stone of their ancestral seat. She felt a quiet tingle at the base of her skull. To set foot in Westeros at last, but not to claim the South or the Iron Throne. Instead, she would travel to the far north, a land of biting winds and endless snows. Yet something about the prospect stirred a strange excitement in her. Perhaps it was because she was done with cowering and waiting in the lemon-scented courts of Essos. Perhaps she yearned to see the land of her birth, even if it was the darkest corner of that land. Viserys was scowling, torn between suspicion and ambition. Daenerys could see how deeply he craved even the smallest recognition from one of the great houses of Westeros. This was not a jest, not a half-hearted attempt. The North had come all this way to propose something that might ultimately place them behind a Targaryen restoration, on conditions. She recalled the old saying that had survived the generations. There must always be a Stark in Winterfell. And now, that Stark extended an invitation. Illyrio cleared his throat softly and set down his cup, letting the gold rings on his plump fingers catch the light. "A moment, my friends," he said gently, though there was a note of caution in his tone. "This is a weighty matter indeed. The princess and her brother will need time to consider. You shall have rooms prepared for you at once. Enjoy Pentos for a few days. See the gardens. Taste the local fare. Allow the Targaryens to deliberate. Then we might reconvene and see if an accord can be reached." "Demsevski?" Roderick Castle inclined his head. "That is acceptable. Thank you, my lord." He rose to his feet. Hallis Mullen and Jella Flint followed suit. "We will await your word. We are prepared to depart as soon as is convenient." Viserys waved a dismissive hand, turning away, leaving Daenerys to make the polite farewells. She rose as well, smoothing her pale dress. "We thank you for traveling so far," she said in a gentle tone. "May your stay in Pentos be a pleasant one." They bowed, and she returned a small, formal tilt of her head. With that, the three northerners filed out, led by the Pentoshi servant who would guide them to their quarters. When the door finally clicked shut, Viserys let out a shuddering breath. His hand twitched as though longing to strike the table or hurl a goblet, but he held himself in check. "He expects me to bend the knee to Stark's hospitality," he muttered. "Can you imagine? If I step foot in Winterfell, I might never return." Daenerys looked at him. He gave his word as to Lord Stark's honor. Even in King's Landing, they always said the Starks are honest, if nothing else. "Demon dots," Viserys sneered, his face twisting with old resentments. "Honest or not, Ned Stark helped the usurper come to power. He destroyed our family, chased us from our rightful throne. I can scarcely believe we are even considering this. But if it is the only way to gain a strong foothold, then perhaps—" He trailed off, frustration and longing warring in his eyes. Illyrio eased closer, folding his hands across his ample middle. "My dear friends, this is precisely why I suggest a little patience. If House Stark truly faces some threat and seeks a Targaryen alliance, it could be the advantage we've waited for all these years." "Now, Daenerys watched her brother, sensing his anger soften into cunning. "You want to be king," she said, meeting his eyes. "Isn't this your chance?" He swallowed hard, his throat bobbing. "Perhaps. And yet, I do not relish placing myself in the stronghold of my father's enemies. But if the rest of the realm sees that Eddard Stark, once Robert Baratheon's dear friend, stands by the Targaryens, it would be a blow to the Baratheon hold on the throne. It might start a cascade of support from other lords who recall the old ties with House Targaryen." Illyrio spread his arms with a conciliatory smile. "This is a conversation to be continued in private, away from prying ears. For now, let me see our guests settled. Then you, my prince, can weigh your choices carefully. And you, princess," he added with a slight bow, "may I suggest a walk in the courtyard gardens? Sometimes fresh air clarifies the mind." Daenerys inclined her head. She was grateful for the suggestion. The tension in the room felt stifling. Viserys muttered something under his breath, then strode away in a swirl of black and red cloth, presumably heading to brood in some other suite in the manse. Illyrio watched him depart, then gave Daenerys a knowing look before waddling out himself, leaving her alone. She stood there, exhaling a tremulous breath. The day had already grown warm, and the thick air felt close on her skin. Gathering her composure, she made her way through the corridor and toward the gardens. The courtyard was a lush space, with carefully curated flowers, a tinkling fountain, and high walls to keep out the bustle of Pentos. She let her sandals click softly over the mosaic tiles that ringed the flower beds, her eyes lingering on the vivid petals drooping in the heat. In the corner, behind a low hedge, the fountain gurgled, water pouring from the mouth of a carved marble fish. She paused by the rim, touched a delicate hand to the water, letting cool drops trickle over her fingertips. So much had changed in mere moments. They had never had a serious invitation from any of the great houses of Westeros before. Always they had languished, hoping for sellswords or dubious alliances with petty lords in the free cities. But to be invited by House Stark, and for reasons so dire, it made Daenerys' mind swirl with thoughts. Could the threat be real? Her brother certainly dismissed it. But the North did not seem the sort to cross half the world chasing fairy tales. She couldn't forget Roderick Castle's stern countenance, the quiet intensity in Jella Flint's eyes, the measured watchfulness of Hallis Mullen. They believed in whatever was happening in the far north. And so she wondered, if the dead truly walked, if winter's wrath was coming, might that not overshadow all other ambitions? Would she see a realm threatened by supernatural horror? Or was it all a ploy to lure Viserys to his doom, a trap cunningly set by Ned Stark? Yet that didn't feel right in her heart. She had learned to read the faces of men during her years in Pentos, and she recognized sincerity in those envoys. Perhaps she wished to believe them too, because it would give her some sense of purpose beyond being her brother's bargaining chip. Maybe she was foolish to cling to that hope. Still, the thought of traveling to the north, forging her own path, didn't it call to her? She listened to the tinkling of the fountain for some time, letting the day drift around her. Occasionally, she heard footsteps beyond the garden walls, the muffled chatter of servants and visitors. The sun edged higher. She realized she was trembling slightly with excitement or trepidation. She could not quite name it. When she returned indoors, she found the halls busy. Servants were carrying in fresh baskets of fruit and jars of spiced wine for dinner. She passed them silently, her face serene, her mind a whirl of indecision. She followed the polished floors, through an archway into a smaller, more private courtyard ringed by slim marble columns. There, she found Viserys standing with Illyrio, locked in hushed conversation. She lingered at the threshold for a moment, hidden behind a column, eavesdropping. Her brother's voice was tense. "I won't go unprotected. If we do this, I'll need an armed escort. The Golden Company has sellswords, but they ask a steep price. I have so little coin." "Yeah, I know." Illyrio's tone was mollifying. "My prince, everything can be arranged, for the right price. And if this leads to you gaining the throne, I'm sure the new king will look kindly upon his old friends." Viserys exhaled loudly, frustration thick in his voice. "I still don't like it. Ned Stark killed our father or helped to. Suppose he decides to take my head as well once he has me in his power. You forget that Eddard Stark is no murderer of children." Illyrio said it in a low voice. "He spared your mother when he took King's Landing. He left you and the princess to flee with the help of loyalists. If he were the type to kill Targaryen babes, we would not be having this conversation. The stories say he did not relish any of that war's bloodshed. But he fought to put Robert on the throne." Viserys spat. "For that, I will never forgive him. But perhaps I can use him. Let him shelter us in the north if he must. At least then, I can gather some strength, maybe win over some houses. But I want to know more. If the White Walkers are truly real, or if it's just some northern superstition. If it is real, all the better to show the realm that Baratheon does nothing to protect them." "Tabitha." Illyrio gave a low chuckle. "A cunning notion, my prince. Conquer hearts by championing their survival. It might just work." Daenerys chose that moment to step forward, letting them see her. Illyrio bowed his head politely, and Viserys turned, his scowl softened by a guarded expression of acceptance. "Sister," he said, trying to sound magnanimous. "You heard?" She nodded. "Some of it. Brother, we can't decide this alone. If we are to go to Winterfell, it's not a matter of me simply following you blindly. We must think carefully. If this is a trap, we risk everything. But if it's sincere, we gain what we've needed for so long, a place in Westeros, the beginnings of real alliances." "Nam?" Viserys studied her, opening and closing his hands. Daenerys knew he found it difficult to trust her counsel at times. He was so used to lording over her, so used to thinking only of himself. But the tension of their predicament forced him to consider her words. "Yes," he said tersely. "We'll think carefully. For now, let us keep the Northerners content. Show them some courtesy. Then, when we meet them again, perhaps I'll make them vow something more substantial." Daenerys suppressed a sigh. She could see that Viserys, in his own way, was at least taking this seriously. She glanced at Illyrio, whose perpetual half-smile revealed nothing. "I'll return to my chambers," she said quietly. "We can speak again tonight." Her brother waved her off, and she left them there, heading deeper into the manse, letting the hush of the corridors envelop her. The day wore on in a slow, stifling haze. She had no appetite at midday. Instead, she found herself drifting past the lavish tapestries and marble sculptures that Illyrio collected. She tried to let her eyes rove over the artistry, but her mind inevitably slipped back to the north and its mysteries. Late afternoon brought with it a cooler breeze, drifting through the high windows. Daenerys retreated to her own suite, spacious, with plush cushions and a carved bed. There, she curled up on a chaise beside the window, gazing out at the rooftops of Pentos, the ships bobbing in the harbor beyond. She let her mind wander, imagining what it might feel like to stand on the deck of a ship sailing west, heading toward the cold shores of the north. In her daydream, the horizon opened wide, the salt spray on her lips and the wind tangling her silver hair. She pictured a place where the nights were long and the snows deep, a fortress rising from the ice, guarded by wolf sheds. In that dream, she walked through the courtyard of Winterfell beneath falling snow, and men in furs nodded respectfully, calling her princess. She pictured speaking with Lord Eddard Stark himself, a man she knew only from stories as a grim figure with dark hair and a face shaped by honor and sorrow. Would he look upon her as the daughter of a mad king, or would he see her as a chance to save the kingdom from the threat he feared? A tap at her door startled her. "Come," she called, lifting her head. It was one of Illyrio's servants, a slender youth who bowed deeply. "Apologies, Your Grace, but dinner is being served in the main hall. The envoys have been invited, and Magister Illyrio has asked that you and your brother attend." "Now." Daenerys rose from her seat, feeling the day's weight clinging to her limbs. "Very well," she said, smoothing her skirt. She allowed the servant to guide her through the halls to the dining room. Night was falling, casting the tall windows in dusky violet light. Braziers had been lit along the walls, and a row of candles flared on the long, polished table, illuminating platters of roasted duck, spiced olives, honey-drizzled bread, and succulent fruit. Illyrio always ensured that any gathering under his roof was lavish. The three northerners sat near one end of the table, looking a bit out of place among the exotic dishes. Roderick Castle caught sight of Daenerys and rose politely, as did the others, giving a small bow of greeting. She inclined her head in return. Viserys was already there, across from them, with Illyrio at the table's head. A few other Pentoshi notables were present, but none of them seemed especially important. Likely Illyrio's business associates or so-called friends, only present for a good meal and the chance to watch foreign intrigue. Daenerys took her seat, aware of the hush that fell. She felt eyes upon her, not least those of Jella Flint, who sat quietly, a tankard of ale in front of her rather than wine. Hallis Mullen was drinking wine, though sparingly, and Roderick Castle was politely sampling the food with the occasional murmur of appreciation. Viserys mustered a gracious smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "Lord Roderick, Master Castle, or do you prefer Sir?" Roderick shook his head with a courteous smile. "No, my prince, I'm no knight. Call me simply Roderick if you wish. In the north, we care less for titles." Viserys gestured vaguely with his goblet, swirling the red wine inside it. "How quaint," he said, and Daenerys felt a flicker of annoyance at her brother's casual scorn. She quickly changed the subject, leaning toward Roderick. "How was your first day in Pentos? Did you find it too hot?" She offered a gentle smile, hoping to ease the tension. Roderick's stiff shoulders loosened slightly. It's warmer than I'm used to. I nearly felt faint in the midday sun, but your Magister was gracious enough to provide shade and refreshments. It's quite different here." Jella Flint spoke up for the first time that evening. "The city is too noisy, but the food is good." She chewed the inside of her lip as if swallowing more words than she spoke. Daenerys nodded. "It can be overwhelming, especially if you come from a place of quiet snows. I used to find Pentos dazzling, but now I see that it can be stifling. There is little that is truly natural here. Everything is arranged, curated, walled in." "Dan?" Roderick's eyes flicked to Viserys, as if gleaning that Daenerys' words might have a deeper meaning. "We do appreciate your hospitality. Perhaps tomorrow we might walk the market to see a bit more of Essos." though I confess, we are eager to hear your thoughts on our proposal." Viserys parted his lips, but Daenerys cut in smoothly, wanting to avoid a confrontation at the dinner table. "We are considering it. The North's invitation intrigues us, and we see that there is much we might discuss. But a matter of such weight cannot be decided overnight." "Nin?" And Roderick inclined his head in acknowledgement. "We understand." Illyrio raised a glass, forcing a jovial note into the atmosphere. "Then, let us put aside heavy talk for the evening. We have music prepared and the best wines in Pentos at our disposal." He clapped his fleshy hands, and suddenly a pair of musicians, dressed in bright silks, stepped forward to pluck out a soft tune on their stringed instruments. For a while, the conversation drifted. Illyrio entertained them with outlandish tales of trade negotiations in distant ports. The Northerners ate sparingly but politely, their eyes seldom leaving the Targaryens. Viserys made only small efforts to mask his impatience. Daenerys was quiet for the most part, letting the music wash over her, letting her eyes linger on the flames dancing in the braziers. Her mind was back in that daydream, traveling north, stepping onto the cobblestones of White Harbor perhaps, feeling the chill in the air, then journeying on to Winterfell. She wondered if the old gods of the weirwood trees would judge her. She wondered if she would be welcomed or feared. There was so much at stake, and she felt it pressing upon her shoulders, heavier than any cloak. When the meal concluded, everyone rose. Illyrio ushered them to a lounge where a final course of honey wine was offered. Daenerys found herself walking beside Roderick Castle, who politely asked, "Do you truly wish to see the North, Princess?" She glanced at him, startled by the gentle tone of his question. Yes, I think so," she admitted softly. "I want to see Westeros. But the North I've heard it is a land of stark beauty and unyielding winters." Roderick gave a small smile that seemed almost paternal. "That's right. It can be harsh, but there is warmth in the halls when the wind howls outside. The people stand by each other. It is not the South, and it never will be, but that is part of its strength." Neterodshi. She studied his face, saw no artifice there. "Thank you," she said, meaning it. "I hope, if we do go, that you'll help me understand the North." He bowed his head. "It would be my honor, Princess." They parted ways in the lounge, taking seats with the others. Viserys joined them, forced a cordial smile, and sipped his honey wine. Gela Flint drank hers in a single swallow, then frowned at the sweetness of it. Alice Mullen chuckled at her reaction. The moment had a fleeting sense of camaraderie, an odd mixture of tension and genuine curiosity. Daenerys found it almost pleasant. Eventually, the evening drew to a close. The Pentoshi notables excused themselves. Full of praise for Illyria's hospitality, the Northerners were shown to their suite by a servant. Viserys strode away, leaving Daenerys with only a brief glance. She lingered, turning to gaze at Illyrio. "Thank you," she said softly. "You've been a gracious host as ever." Illyrio chuckled, brushing imaginary crumbs off his silks. "I'm always pleased to facilitate interesting alliances, my dear princess." He patted her shoulder. "Remember, Pentos thrives on trade and negotiation. If House Targaryen unites with House Stark, well, one day there may be great benefits for all. Let us hope this grows into something fruitful." His words seemed layered with ambition, but she nodded. She had grown accustomed to Illyria's honeyed maneuvers long ago. "Good night," she said. She left him there in the lounge, making her way through the corridors by the dim glow of sconces. Near her suite, she halted by a tall window that looked out onto the city, now lit by lamps and torches, the streets winding like serpents toward the Black Sea. She pressed a hand to the glass. The North was so far away, beyond that dark water, beyond the horizon that called to her every time she closed her eyes. Yet now, for the first time, it might be within reach. A flicker in the courtyard below caught her eye. She saw a figure standing by the fountain, alone, looking up at the moon. The silhouette was slender and unfamiliar, perhaps Gela Flint, one of the northern envoys, out seeking the cool night air. Daenerys wondered if Gela was feeling as restless as she was, parted from her homeland. Did she long for home? or was she fascinated by the foreign wonders around her? Daenerys let the moments stretch, her breath fogging the glass. Then, with a small exhale, she turned away from the window and slipped into her suite. A single candle burned there, casting flickering shadows on the walls. She undressed herself, the movements slow and methodical, and changed into a nightgown of fine pale fabric. Sitting on the edge of her bed, she felt her pulse thrum in her ears. Words swirled through her mind. Winterfell. White Walkers. Unity. Fall. Fear. Opportunity. She closed her eyes, trying to imagine the faces of the northern men and women once more. She pictured Ned Stark from the old descriptions. A solemn man, loyal to a fault, burdened by the memory of war. Could she truly face him without anger, without guilt over her father's sins, without fear that the ghosts of the past would overshadow any alliance they might forge? But other thoughts intruded. The satisfaction of stepping onto Westerosi soil as something other than a beggar. The sense of doing something meaningful, not simply chasing illusions of a throne. If the North truly faced a threat, maybe her presence could help. Maybe she could make a difference that would show all of Westeros that a Targaryen might still stand for something worthy. She laid down on the cool sheets, her hair splayed around her, silver in the candlelight. Slowly her breathing settled. Tomorrow, she would speak more with Viserys, attempt to glean whether his mind had set on journeying to the north. If he refused, would she dare go alone? The question stirred a thrilling terror in her. She was not quite so bold yet, was she? Or perhaps she was. She no longer felt like the frightened girl who walked on eggshells around her brother. She had grown stronger in small ways, each passing day. As the candle guttered low, she let her mind drift to a dream. A dream of a wolf and a dragon, side by side, staring out over a field of snow. A dream where she walked among them, warmed by a fire that came not from destruction but from hope, forging a new path forward. She did not know whether it was only fantasy, but she held it close, let it fill the hollow ache within her, and finally allowed herself to slip into a restless sleep. Morning would come soon enough, and with it, more discussions, more decisions. The North had cast its line across the sea. Now it waited to see if the dragon would bite. If she and Viserys could find the courage to trust. If they had the wisdom to see that the old ways might need to be broken for something new to rise. Whether that new thing could claim the Iron Throne, or save the realm from the creeping cold, no one could yet say. But Daenerys knew in her heart that she was no longer content to stand idle. The course of her destiny was shifting, and she felt the pull of it like a tide, urging her west, calling her home. Cow. The morning air in Pentos felt thick against Daenerys' skin. The promise of another hot day already tangible as dawn's first light stole into her chamber. She drifted awake gradually, her dreams of the North still clinging to her senses. For a lingering moment, she thought she smelled snow, but as she inhaled, the reality of salt and foreign spices set her dream to flight. She rose from the bed, pushing away the gauzy curtains that swayed in a faint breeze, and set her bare feet on the smooth floor. Outside, gulls cawed, and the hush of the city beginning to stir reminded her that events of the prior day were not mere imagination. The northern envoys had come. They waited now under Illyria's roof for an answer that might change all of their fates. A quiet knock sounded. Jiki, one of the young maidservants, stepped in and bowed her head shyly. She carried a silver basin filled with water scented faintly of citrus. Daenerys offered the girl a small smile. Jiki set the basin on a side table, retrieved a cloth, and handed it to Daenerys. The princess soaked the cloth and pressed it to her face, letting the cool water chase away the last dregs of sleep. Jiki's soft voice broke the calm. "Breakfast is ready, my lady." The Magister asked if you would dine with him, the prince, and the guests. Daenerys wiped her hands and nodded. "I will come," she said gently. "Thank you." The girl curtsied and slipped away, the hem of her faded gown brushing against the tiles. Daenerys crossed to the tall mirror propped by the wall. An opulent thing in a gilt frame, brought by Illyrio from some distant land. She examined her own reflection, silver hair falling loose around her shoulders, lilac eyes that looked far more composed than she felt. She dressed carefully in a pale gown that clung lightly to her figure. It was simpler than the flamboyant silks Illyrio so often provided, but she felt more comfortable in something that did not weigh her down with too many jewels or overbearing embroidery. She fastened a thin belt at her waist and pinned her hair back in small braids, letting a few wisps fall around her face. Ready at last, she went out into the hallway. Through a screened window, sunlight was turning the courtyard's blooms into bright splashes of color. The gentle murmuring of a fountain lulled her as she passed. One of Illyria's guards escorted her to the breakfast room, a smaller private space off the main banquet hall. She found Illyrio seated at a round table, a platter of fruit and fragrant bread before him, though from the look of things he had eaten little. Roderick Castle, Gella Flint, and Hallis Mullen were there as well. Viserys had not yet arrived. When they saw her, the Northerners rose out of courtesy. Roderick offered a respectful dip of his head. "Good morning, Princess." Daenerys smiled. "Good morning. I hope you slept well." Roderick's mustache twitched in something akin to a smile. "Well enough. Though the warmth here is a challenge." She gestured for them to be seated again, as Illyrio motioned to a free chair. Servants glided in, pouring watered wine and laying out platters of eggs, grilled fish, and sliced pears drizzled with honey. The aroma curled around them, promising a pleasant meal, yet Daenerys' stomach felt tight with anticipation. She forced herself to sip from her cup and nibble at a piece of soft bread. Illyrio spread his hands in a welcoming gesture. "Our prince should be here shortly," he said, his tone far too jovial. "Let us enjoy this repast in the meantime. My cooks have outdone themselves as usual. Princess, do try the pears. You'll find them sweet as any you might pluck from the arbor." Daenerys nodded, taking a small bite. The fruit's sweetness flooded her tongue, yet her mind remained fixed on the question that loomed between them all. She glanced at the Northerners. Gella Flint was focusing on her plate, but every so often her gaze lifted, as though assessing Daenerys' posture, her expressions, the cut of her dress. Hallis Mullen was content to fill his belly with measured caution. Roderick Castle kept his manner polite, but Daenerys saw the curiosity in his eyes. They wanted to know if she and her brother would answer their invitation, or send them away. Several minutes slid by. Servants refilled cups, cleared away scraps. At last, the door opened, and Viserys entered. His pale hair was bound at the nape of his neck with a strip of black ribbon, and he wore a high-collared tunic of dusty red that had once boasted bright Targaryen colors, but now appeared somewhat washed out by time and wear. He looked around the table, then took a seat without waiting for ceremony. "Apologies," he said, his voice taut. "I was speaking with a certain friend about matters of importance." He gave no further explanation. Illyrio offered him a sympathetic nod. "We are only just starting," the Magister said lightly. "Please, my prince, break your fast." Viserys waved away the nearest plate. "I've no taste for fish this morning. Some wine, if you please." He snapped his fingers for a servant, and Daenerys felt a pang of embarrassment at his brusqueness. She tried to diffuse the tension. "Brother," she said calmly. "The envoys and I were remarking on the differences in climate. We were about to discuss the differences in markets as well." Viserys lifted one brow. "Were we?" Roderick cleared his throat softly. "I was hoping to venture into the city proper today, to see how goods pass through the port, glean some sense of associate trade. It could be useful knowledge if we are to bring your cause across the sea one day. I hope I might extend an invitation to both of you. The marketplace is not quite like a tour of the Great Pyramid of Giza, but still, it might be enlightening." "Then they're minor down." Illyrio touched the points of his beard. "As your host, I'd gladly arrange an escort. The Pentoshi markets can be lively, and you may wish for a guide." He paused, gauging Viserys' mood. "I can spare a few men to ensure your security." Viserys' lips tightened, perhaps at the suggestion he needed protection in the city. Daenerys spoke quietly, hoping to smooth over any potential friction. "That might be pleasant. I confess, I haven't strolled the market in some time. My brother is often too wary of crowds." She glanced at Viserys, silently imploring him not to bristle. He inhaled sharply, then nodded, as though granting permission. "Very well. If the North is so keen to see associate commerce, We can spare an hour." Daenerys refrained from sighing in relief. Instead, she reached for her cup of watered wine. That settled then. Breakfast concluded with minimal chatter. Viserys drank only a single cup of wine, then excused himself, muttering that he had matters to attend to before venturing out. Roderick Castle and his two companions likewise rose, giving polite farewells. That left Daenerys and Illyrio alone at the table. The Magister studied her over the rim of his goblet, eyes keen despite his half-lidded demeanor. "You have your work cut out, dear princess," he said softly. "Your brother is not an easy man to sway." Daenerys set her spoon aside. "He never has been, but at least he's willing to accompany the Northerners to the market." Illyrio tugged at a ring on his fat finger, golden and gleaming. "Small steps, yes, but do be cautious. If the plan is for you both to travel to Winterfell, and that's a monumental if, Viserys must be convinced he will not lose his life the moment he arrives. He harbors old resentments and deep fears. He can be like a cornered cat." Daenerys murmured her agreement, then stood from the table. The day was only beginning, and she felt an anxious flutter at the idea of walking through Pentos with the men of the North. Perhaps she could glean more about their sincerity. Perhaps they could glean something about her. She left Illyrio behind and returned to her chambers, where she called for Jiki to bring her a cloak of thin linen, enough to stave off the direct sun without stifling her in the heat. The girl, eyes alight with curiosity, helped Daenerys drape it over her shoulders. Soon enough, she heard footsteps in the corridor. Jella Flint's voice, hushed but distinct, conversing with one of Illyrio's servants. Daenerys stepped out to meet them. Jella's expression was guarded, but she inclined her head in greeting. "Princess, you ready?" "I am," Daenerys replied softly. "Roderick and Hallis? They're waiting in the courtyard. Your brother said he would meet us there." Daenerys nodded. They made their way through the manse's corridors, the marble floors reverberating with their steps. Jella walked a half-pace behind, scanning the corners as if expecting trouble. It occurred to Daenerys that these envoys were not only emissaries but guards in their own right. The North did not send out such travelers lightly. They emerged into the courtyard, where sunlight poured over the tiled ground. Roderick stood near the fountain, speaking in low tones to Hallis and a few of Illyrio's men. When he spotted Daenerys, he offered a courteous bow. "Princess, I see you're prepared. We've arranged some horses for the ride into the city." Daenerys smiled. "Thank you. My brother will be here shortly." "Then mine?" She moved closer to the small group, letting the courtyard's warmth wrap around her. Hallis Mullen nodded a greeting, wearing a practical expression. He had a straightforward look that made her think he was more soldier than politician. Jella Flint quietly joined them, crossing her arms. Before long, Viserys appeared, accompanied by two of Illyrio's household guards. He seemed irritable, scanning the courtyard as if it might offend him. "Let's make this quick," he said. "I have no patience for milling about in the sun." Roderick exchanged a glance with Daenerys, then nodded. "As you wish." The horses were waiting by the gate to Illyrio's estate, an assortment of lean Associ breeds more accustomed to short distances than long rides. Daenerys patted the neck of the mare offered to her, murmuring a gentle greeting. She was still not the most confident rider. She had traveled mostly by foot or caravan in her youth, but she settled into the saddle with a poise that belied her nerves. Viserys took his mount, muttering complaints about the lack of proper Targaryen horses. Daenerys suppressed a smile. The Northmen mounted in silence, used to sturdier, thick-coated animals, yet they adapted quickly. The group set off down the estate's broad lane. Tall cypress trees lined the path, swaying in a faint breeze, and beyond the walls, Pentos spread out in every direction, a maze of narrow streets, open plazas, and the blue glitter of the sea in the distance. Once they cleared the estate gate, the noise of the city folded around them. Street vendors called out from stalls piled high with spices and dyed fabrics. Donkeys pulled wooden carts loaded with fruit, weaving through the throng of people. The air carried a medley of cooking aromas, sweat, and brine. Hallis Mullen surveyed the bustling streets, mouth slightly open. "7 hells," he muttered under his breath. "It's like a festival every day." Roderick guided his horse closer to Daenerys. Is it always so crowded? Daenerys nodded. Especially near the harbor. Pentos draws traders from across the narrow sea and beyond. Illyrio often says that half the world's goods pass through these docks at some point or another. Viserys, riding ahead, glanced back scornfully. A pity it's all wasted on squabbling magisters and petty merchant princes. None of it belongs to us. He spurred his horse on, forcing the small entourage to pick up the pace. Daenerys swallowed her annoyance at his tone. She steered her horse alongside Roderick's, letting Illyria's guards move to the front. They passed through an archway into a wide market square, where an array of stalls formed colorful rows. Musicians were playing a lively tune on stringed instruments, their hats placed on the ground for coins. Craftsmen displayed carpets, jewelry, weapons forged from exotic alloys. All the while, voices rose in a dozen tongues. The square felt alive with possibility and tension. Gela Flint frowned thoughtfully, scanning the stalls. We see so little of this in the north. Our markets are quieter, more straightforward. Here, there's so much. She trailed off, shaking her head as though she couldn't quite find the word. Chaos. Hallis supplied, earning a wry nod from her. Daenerys dismounted with care, handing her reins to a guard. Shall we walk? She suggested. It's easier to see the wares this way. Viserys slid from his saddle, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeve. Yes, let's get this over with. He had not wanted to come at all, but Daenerys believed that seeing the city might remind him of the broader world beyond his resentments. Or so she hoped. They ambled into the labyrinth of stalls. The guards flanked them, watchful. Though no one in the crowd seemed to pay particular attention to a small group of foreigners. Travelers passed through Pentos every day. In one corner, a smith hammered out horseshoes, sparks flying. Next to him, a woman was selling bright green melons stacked precariously on a wooden cart. Children darted underfoot. The air smelled of roasted meat, and the incense burned by fortune tellers, hawking glimpses of fate. Daenerys watched Roderick. He studied everything, from the goods on display to the thickness of the crowds, and especially the ships visible through a gap in the buildings. She guessed he was assessing how armies might pass through here, or how quickly one could arrange ships. Perhaps he imagined what it would take to ferry Targaryen supporters back to Westeros. Or maybe he was simply marveling at how different Pentos was from the north. They came upon a stall selling carved wooden figurines, tiny dragons, stags, wolves, and other beasts. The artisan, an older man with careful hands, waved them over in broken common tongue. Fine carvings. Look. Many animals. See the dragons for the Valyrians. Viserys paused, a spark of interest in his eyes. He picked up a small wooden dragon, running his thumb across the rich back. Daenerys watched him, wishing it could awaken some gentler side within him. But Viserys set it down hastily, as though the carving had stung him. Gela drifted closer to a wolf carving, which was rendered with its muzzle raised in a silent howl. She glanced at Roderick, who met her gaze and gave a subtle nod, an entire conversation passing between them in that single look. Daenerys knew it was a sign of their northern bond. They belonged to that land, shaped by its legacy. She tried to imagine how she and her brother might forge a connection with such people. Viserys abruptly turned away from the stall, stepping back out into the throng. This is pointless, he muttered under his breath, though Daenerys doubted the northerners heard him. She excused herself to the artisan and followed Viserys, who was weaving through the crowd with an impatient gait. She caught his arm. Brother, wait. When he paused, she lowered her voice. Why not try to learn something from them? They are here for you as well as for me. Viserys shook her off, eyes narrowing. Don't presume to lecture me. I know very well why they're here. If they have any intention of supporting my claim, we'll see it soon enough. Daenerys set her jaw, realizing she would gain little by pushing him now. We should return to them, she said, adopting a more conciliatory tone. We came together after all. Viserys exhaled. Fine. They found Roderick, Gela, and Hallis studying another stall. this one filled with luscious fabrics dyed in shades of turquoise, crimson, and saffron. Gela touched one bolt of cloth, letting it slide between her calloused fingertips. The vendor immediately tried to tout the cloth's miraculous origins, claiming it was woven in Ashai by shadowbinders, to which Gela gave a skeptical snort. Roderick turned at Daenerys' approach. "You two wandered off," he said mildly. "We did," Daenerys admitted with a smile. Viserys grew tired of the carvings. "Apologies." Gela left the cloth behind and rejoined them. "I've never seen so many foreign goods in one place. It must be dizzying to live here." Roderick nodded. "Still, I see how trade could fortify an alliance. If House Targaryen were to gain the Iron Throne, connections to Essos might benefit the entire realm, particularly if the threat in the north demands outside resources." Viserys looked disinterested, but Daenerys engaged softly. "That depends on how willingly the lords of Westeros accept outside commerce. Many prefer to rely on their own harvests or their vassals. The crown can impose taxes, but forging new trade routes requires stability. Right now, the realm might be at peace on the surface, but tensions remain." Roderick gave her a pensive look. "And you think your brother's ascension could bring stability?" She saw Viserys bristle, so she chose her words carefully. "It could if handled wisely," she answered. "But wisdom requires cooperation. The realm would need to see there is a common purpose, especially if the tales of White Walkers prove true." "Enter Kalama." Roderick nodded gravely. "One can only hope. If we fail to unite, we risk facing the darkness alone." Viserys turned sharply, beckoning to Illyria's guards. "We've seen enough. Let's be on our way," he announced, the forced politeness in his voice suggesting he had endured as much bonding as he could bear. The Northerners did not argue. They made their way back toward the horses, but the crowd had thickened, forcing them to pick their path carefully. At one point, a cloaked figure bumped into Viserys, muttered an apology, and disappeared before Daenerys could see a face. She felt a spike of concern, but nothing seemed amiss. Even so, she noticed how Hallis Mullen's hand drifted toward the hilt of his sword. Tension shimmered in the air, gone as soon as the figure vanished into the teeming masses. Once mounted, they rode slowly out of the market district, crossing a canal bridged by stones worn smooth by countless feet. A row of pastel buildings lined the water, windows flung open to let out the heat of midday. People leaned from balconies, calling to each other. A barge floated under the bridge, a single oarsman propelling it along. Daenerys glimpsed crates on the deck, probably loaded with spices or dried fish. The faint smell of the canal water made her wrinkle her nose. As they left the crowded heart of Pentos, the streets widened. They passed under a tall gatehouse adorned with friezes of mythical beasts, then wound up a gentle slope that led back to Illyria's estate. The trip, though short, had worn on all of them. Daenerys sensed her brother's patience had been tested, while the Northerners had gleaned a broader view of Essosi life. She could only guess what new thoughts brewed behind their calm expressions. Upon reaching the estate, they dismounted in the courtyard. Servants hurried to take the horses. Roderick Castle removed his gloves and looked at Viserys. "Thank you for accompanying us, my prince. It was instructive to see a taste of Essos." Viserys gave a stiff nod. "I'm sure it was." Gela Flint gazed around at the estate's architecture with frank interest. "It's remarkable how different it is from the keeps in Westeros. We use so much stone. Everything here seems shaped by marble and tile." Illyrio himself bustled out onto the courtyard steps, beaming. "Ah, you've returned. I trust our fair city did not disappoint." Roderick inclined his head. "It certainly did not. We're grateful for the opportunity." Illyrio waved a hand, rings glinting. "It pleases me to show Pentos to guests of such importance. Come inside. The day grows hot, and we can arrange a cool drink." "Damin?" Daenerys followed them into the shade of the manse, grateful for the respite. The main hall welcomed them with a swirl of incense. She inhaled, letting her heartbeat settle. Viserys, however, took one look around and declared, "I need to rest. Show these good people to the lounge if you must." "Sister, come with me." He did not wait for her response. striding down a corridor toward his own quarters. Daenerys offered the Northerners a small, apologetic smile. "If you'll excuse me." Roderick nodded understandingly. "Of course." With that, Daenerys followed her brother's retreating form, quickening her pace. She found him at the threshold of his chambers. He pushed the door open and beckoned her in, closing it behind them so no ears could eavesdrop. The room was spacious, but dim, the shutters drawn to keep out the worst of the sun. A faintly sweet perfume hung in the air, probably from the potpourri Illyrio had left in small bowls on a side table. Viserys crossed to a window, opening one shutter enough to let in a shaft of light. His face was flushed from the ride and from frustration. "I won't be used as a spectacle," he snapped, turning to Daenerys. "Illyrio parades us around as though we're curiosities. The Northmen look at me as if they doubt whether I'm fit to be king." Daenerys folded her arms, keeping her voice level. "They are measuring you, yes. But that's no different from how any ally would assess a potential partner." He glared. "Doesn't mean I have to like it. I won't dance for them. If they want to stand by the dragon, let them do so without expecting me to beg for their approval." She took a slow breath. "Brother, if the North extends an invitation for us to come to Winterfell, there will be more scrutiny there than in Pentos. If we do go, you must be prepared to show them that we can be worthy allies. Otherwise, they might withdraw their offer. Then, where would that leave us?" Viserys's jaw tightened. "You speak as though you believe I need to prostrate myself. We are Targaryens. The throne is ours by right. If Ned Stark wants to help me claim it, he can do so. Otherwise, he can rot in his snows." Daenerys felt the ember of her own annoyance ignite. "We have no army," she said, voice trembling with suppressed urgency. "We have no wealth, no support from the other houses. We need them as much as they might need us." Viserys' eyes flashed. He stepped closer, his hand twitching as though he might grab her arm, but he refrained. Instead, he spoke in a low hiss. "Do not forget your place, sister. I am the dragon, not you." She met his gaze, refusing to cower. In her chest, her heart pounded with a swirl of anger, sadness, and a deep-seated longing for him to see reason. "I know who you are," she murmured, "but the rest of the realm does not yet. If you wish to win them, you must show them more than your temper." His face twitched. For a moment, she thought he might lash out. Then his shoulders slumped, and he turned away, running a hand through his hair. "Get out," he muttered, voice weary. "I need to think." Daenerys hesitated, then walked to the door, her steps soft on the floor. Before she crossed the threshold, she paused, glancing back at him. He stood by the window, a figure caught in a shaft of hazy sunlight, head bowed in thought. She left without another word. In the corridor, she drew in a shaky breath. A swirl of conflicting emotions whirled inside her. She had stood up to him more boldly than usual, and he had not struck her, not this time. Perhaps that meant he was too tired or too uncertain to lash out as he once might have. Perhaps there was hope he would relent and consider the alliance more carefully. She found her way to the lounge, where Roderick, Gela, and Hallis were finishing cups of chilled wine served by Illyria's staff. They rose at her entrance. Illyrio was there as well, perched on a cushioned seat, one of his hands smoothing over the front of his robe. Gela studied Daenerys' face. "Is everything all right?" Daenerys managed a small, composed smile. "Yes. My brother is simply fatigued from the heat. He prefers solitude for the moment." Roderick's gaze lingered on her expression, but he only said, "We understand." Illyrio clasped his hands. "Ah, young men and their tempers. Rest assured my prince will come around in time." Silence followed. Daenerys was acutely aware that each of them was waiting for some sign, some decision. She cleared her throat softly. "Would you three care to join me in the gardens? They're more comfortable than this enclosed space, and the day is still bright." Roderick seemed pleased by the idea. Of course. They left the lounge together. Illyrio chose to remain behind with some excuse about accounts to balance, leaving the small group to wander. Daenerys led them through the corridor, past a pair of tall doors, and out Into the estate, larger garden. Ornamental trees cast patches of shade, and a long reflecting pool ran down the center, flanked by hedges that bore clusters of white flowers. Daenerys walked slowly along the water's edge, admiring the flashes of gold and orange beneath the surface, ornamental fish that Illyrio kept for the novelty. Roderick followed, glancing at the manicured shrubs and carefully placed statuary. Gela and Hallis stayed a few steps behind. After a time, Roderick broke the companionable silence. "Princess, may I speak plainly?" When she nodded, he continued, "I saw the look on your face when you returned. Things with your brother are not simple, are they?" "Bebimrusher." Daenerys stopped walking, folding her hands at her waist. "They never have been. We've had only each other for so long, and that shapes a person in ways you might not understand." Roderick rested his hand lightly on the pommel of his sword, a gesture of habit rather than threat. "I do not wish to intrude on your family, but if House Targaryen is to come to Winterfell, we must be sure your brother is prepared. The North will sense any sign of arrogance or disrespect, especially given our painful history with your father." Daenerys' throat tightened. "I know. But Viserys believes he is owed everything. Our father taught him that Targaryens are dragons above all others, and our exile has only hardened his pride." Hallis Mullen, who had been quiet all day, murmured, "Men who cling to pride can break when forced to bend. I hope he can find a middle ground. Lord Stark won't kneel to a child's temper." Gela Flint's voice was direct. "Can he do it? Truly? I'm asking you, Princess. You know him best. Will he be able to set aside his rancor long enough to see what's best for Westeros?" "Yes." Daenerys' heart pounded at the blunt question. She looked past the hedges, where pink flowers nodded in a faint breeze. Her voice, when it came, was soft but resolute. "I cannot promise how he'll behave, but I believe he needs you. If the threat beyond the wall is real, then Westeros needs all of us. I will do everything in my power to ensure he approaches your lord with respect." She paused, inhaling the perfumed air. "If Viserys refuses to learn, then we're all lost." Roderick studied her for a moment, then gave a solemn nod. "I have faith that Lord Stark can sense sincerity and fear in equal measure. If the prince arrives with enough humility, an alliance might still be forged." They resumed walking, the soft chirping of birds around them. Daenerys noted the thoughtful expressions on their faces. These were loyal servants of the North, but they were also rational men and women who recognized the complexities of forging alliances out of old enmities. She recalled how her father's reign had ended in blood. She prayed that if she and Viserys ever set foot in Winterfell, it would not be a harbinger of more violence. Evening came in a wash of gold and lavender across the sky. Daenerys bade farewell to the Northerners for the day, suggesting they rest and let the night's coolness soothe their sun-baked skin. She retreated to her chambers, where she found a simple meal of roasted vegetables and rice laid out by Illyria's servants. She picked at it without real appetite. The day's events weighed heavily, especially her confrontation with Viserys. Afterward, she stood by the window, gazing at the city in twilight. Lamps glimmered in windows, and along the harbor, torches lit the piers where ships rocked on the tide. She could almost imagine those ships setting sail for Westeros, carrying her across the narrow sea, at last. But the reality felt tangled, precarious. Would her brother relent? Would Ned Stark truly open his halls to them? Each question seemed to raise another, until her mind buzzed. She finally lay down, the sheets cool against her legs, and closed her eyes. Sleep came in fits and starts. Dreams took her again to a land of snow and sky, where a lone wolf howled beneath frosty stars. She dreamed of walking in thick drifts of snow, her feet numb and her breath fogging. Ahead of her, a castle rose, dark stone under a winter moon. The closer she got, the louder the howling became, as though warning her away or summoning her onward. She could not tell which. When dawn broke, she woke with a start. Her body felt stiff. She slid from the bed, bathed quickly, and dressed in a loose gown of lavender linen. She braided her hair more simply than usual, leaving most of it to hang freely. Something about the day gave her a slight tremor of nerves. She sensed a turning point was near, though she could not say precisely how. Outside her door, Illyrio himself waited, a cup of fragrant tea in his hand. He offered it to her with a flourish. "A new day, Princess Daenerys. I trust you are well?" She accepted the tea, sipping carefully. It tasted of mint and honey, refreshing against her dry mouth. "I've been better, but thank you, Magister." "Why wait for me?" He chuckled, patting a gold chain at his neck. "I have news. Your brother approached me early this morning. He asked whether my contacts could procure a small ship. I asked him for what purpose, and he mentioned traveling west. Though not, it seems, to the Summer Isles. He inquired specifically about White Harbor." "Madame Daenerys' heart thudded. "He wants to sail to the north." "So it would appear. The distance from here to White Harbor is considerable, but not impossible. Many ships make that journey carrying cargo. Of course your brother has no fortune, so he came to me for aid." She held the teacup in both hands. "And what did you say?" "I told him I would see what could be done. The cost of charting a ship exclusively for your use is not trivial, but you are my friends. You know I've always invested in interesting possibilities. Still, I suspect he plans to test the sincerity of these northern envoys. Perhaps sail with them, perhaps only with a small retinue." Daenerys nodded slowly. "Then he might be serious about this alliance, or else he has some other plan in mind." Illyrio's dark eyes danced with speculation. "Your brother is many things, but subtle is not one of them. If he wanted to betray them, it would be easier to do so here, not sail halfway across the world. I suspect he's genuinely intrigued, if only because he sees a path to the throne." "How?" She set down the empty cup, her mind racing. "Then we should speak with the Northerners at once. They may wish to return soon." Illyrio bowed slightly, his stomach rounding over the sash that girdled his robe. "They wait in the library with your brother even now." He gestured for her to follow. Daenerys squared her shoulders and walked beside him through the corridors, passing a pair of tall columns supporting arches painted with scenes of ancient Valyria. The estate's grandeur might have impressed her once, but now it felt more like a cage she was desperate to leave. She could not quell the flutter of anticipation in her chest. A ship, sailing west. This was the beginning of something monumental, if it came to pass. The library was a long room, with tall windows on one side, dusty tomes lining shelves on the other. Decorative swords and spears hung on the walls, silent guardians of knowledge. At a central table, Daenerys saw her brother in heated discussion with Roderick Castle. Gela and Hallis stood by, arms folded. The tension was palpable as she and Illyrio approached. Viserys glanced at her, exhaling sharply. "Sister, come. We were just discussing the logistics of a voyage to White Harbor." Roderick inclined his head. "Princess." Daenerys looked from one face to another, trying to read the mood. "So, this is decided then?" Viserys gave a tight shrug. "I have not committed fully. But if they insist we meet Lord Stark in person, then I would do so on neutral ground. White Harbor belongs to House Manderley, sworn to Stark but still open to ships from Essos. And it's a shorter journey to Winterfell from there than landing in the southern ports." He paused, tapping his foot restlessly. "The question is how many men we bring, how many days at sea, and of course the matter of cost." Roderick nodded gravely. "We can provide a ship as well, if you trust your men to sail with ours. But it might be safer for us all to travel together. If you suspect treachery, we suspect it too. Better that we keep our eyes on one another, openly, without subterfuge." "No," Viserys sneered, but Daenerys stepped in, her voice calm. "I agree. If we're to build trust, let us do so from the start. We travel on the same ship, if it's large enough to hold our party in comfort." Hallis Mullen scratched at his beard. "It might be cramped, but we can manage. We'll be at sea some weeks depending on weather, longer if storms blow in." Viserys wrinkled his nose, clearly displeased by the notion of a long journey crammed together. But Daenerys could see he was fighting with himself. He wanted to appear decisive, regal, above petty discomfort. "I will speak with Illyrio about a suitable vessel," he said. "One that is at least moderately comfortable." Roderick let out a measured breath. "This is progress, my prince. When do you propose we set sail?" "Soon," Viserys replied. "I've grown weary of pentos and the prattling of magisters. There's no point delaying if the realm truly stands on the brink. But I have one condition." He fixed Roderick with a steely look. "I will not place myself in Ned Stark's power without certain assurances. If I disembark at White Harbor, I want your pledge that we will be met with no hostility. If there's to be any justice demanded of House Targaryen, it must wait until the threat in the north is dealt with." Roderick's expression revealed a trace of compassion, though it was quickly replaced by solemnity. "You have my word. Lord Stark does not seek vengeance against children of the Mad King. If he intended that, he would not have sent us in the first place." Viserys' jaw tensed at the mention of the Mad King. Daenerys cut in before her brother's anger could spark. "We accept your word, Roderick Castle. We will trust in the honor of House Stark." Roderick bowed deeply. "You do us respect, Princess. I promise you my lord's intentions are genuine. All we seek is unity and survival." Viserys lifted his chin. "Then let us finalize the details with Illyrio. Gather whatever supplies we need, enough for the crossing. I have little baggage, but I'll not do without certain comforts." Gela Flint gave a short nod. "We'll make arrangements as well. Pallas is skilled at inspecting ships for seaworthiness, so we'll handle that side with your Magister." Then Santan. A slight pause ensued, and Daenerys felt a heady rush. They were truly leaving. Not crossing to King's Landing or Dragonstone, but to the far north. A path entirely unexpected, yet perhaps the only path that made sense. She glanced at her brother, but he did not meet her eyes. She wondered if he felt excitement or only dread. His face was shuttered, an unreadable mask. At length, Illyrio cleared his throat, stepping forward. "Excellent. I shall set my factors to the task at once. Give us a few days, perhaps a sennight, and we'll have the ship ready for you all, stocked with provisions for the journey. Rest assured, my dear guests, I will see that you are well cared for. Now." Viserys turned away, arms clasped behind his back. "A sennight. Very well. I'll use the time to prepare." His voice was clipped. After a moment, he looked back at Roderick, a hint of grudging respect in his eyes. "We set sail together then." Roderick inclined his head once more, relief flickering across his features. "We do." No one said anything else for a moment. The hush of the library seemed to pulse with the significance of their decision. Daenerys caught the faint smell of parchment and ink, mingling with the subtle perfume of flowers drifting through the open windows. "Far outside," a gull cried, as though mocking or blessing their alliance. Eventually, Roderick gestured for Gela and Hallis to follow him. "We will see ourselves out. I trust you have matters to discuss." His tone was respectful, and Daenerys did not fail to notice how he directed the words equally to Viserys and to her. They filed out, leaving the Targaryen siblings and Illyrio alone. Viserys expelled a breath. "So that's settled then. We're actually going to Westeros." Daenerys moved closer. "Not just Westeros, the North. It's what you wanted in some form, returning to the land of our ancestors." He pressed a hand against a shelf, as though needing the support. "It isn't how I pictured it. I wanted to arrive in King's Landing with banners unfurled, lords flocking to my side. Instead, I'm sneaking into White Harbor to treat with the man who helped destroy our father. But if this leads to the throne, it might be worth the humiliation." "Val." Daenerys watched him carefully. "Let's not dwell on humiliation. This is an opportunity. If House Stark truly fears a dire threat, your willingness to address it may show the rest of Westeros the measure of your kingship. You could be the one who led them through winter's storm." He stared at her. For once, he seemed almost lost in thought, uncertain. Then he laughed quietly, a dry sound. "Perhaps. Or I'll be a fool dancing for my father's enemies. Either way, I'll walk forward with eyes open. If Ned Stark or his brood think to harm me, I won't go alone." Daenerys. Illyrio spread his hands in a placating gesture. My prince, I will ensure you have good men at your side. And if the alliance proves fruitful, you will not forget Pentos' generosity, yes? Viserys gave the Magister a faint smirk. Indeed not. If the North helps me reclaim my birthright, you'll be well rewarded. Daenerys said nothing of rewards. She turned to Illyrio. Thank you for your hospitality. But we must prepare. We'll need clothing suited for colder climes, will we not? Ewan. Illyrio beamed, as if such an arrangement were a thrilling challenge. Certainly. I'll have my tailors begin at once. Fur-lined cloaks, sturdy boots, whatever you require. I've fabrics enough to swaddle a small army. Viserys brushed past her, heading for the door. You handle that, sister. I have other business to attend. She watched him go, a swirl of tension in her chest. His shoulders were set, his posture rigid. He was forging ahead, but the bitterness still clung to him like an old cloak. Daenerys prayed that once they stepped onto northern soil, he might find a new perspective. But she knew better than to rely on prayers alone. Illyrio, sensing her worry, placed a hand on her arm. Courage, princess. The road ahead is uncertain. But you've taken the first step. That is often the hardest. She nodded, her throat tight. Thank you, Magister. If you'll excuse me, I'll speak with the tailors. She paused, letting a small, almost apologetic smile touch her lips. We really do have much to do. He patted her arm and stepped aside. She walked out of the library, the echo of her footsteps following her down the corridor. In her mind, images flashed. The wide ocean, a deck under her feet, salt spray in her hair, and the distant shoreline of a place she had never seen. White Harbor, they called it. She imagined tall white walls, a bustling port in a land of shorter summers and longer nights. Then further inland, across leagues of fields and forests, lay Winterfell, a place of hot springs and ancient weirwoods. If the stories were true, she wondered if it would feel more like home than the city of marble and spice ever had. She spent the rest of the day in a flurry of preparations, speaking with tailors and seamstresses who fussed over patterns and measurements. She insisted on simpler designs, practical and warm, while still carrying a suggestion of Targaryen regality in their color choices. Somber grays with a subtle silver thread, or deep blues with a faint scale-like pattern. She thought it would be wise not to flaunt too much red and black in stark territory, though she included a single cloak lined with black fur and embroidered dragons for formal occasions. Now and then, her thoughts turned to the Northmen themselves. Roderick, with his calm composure and fatherly patience. Gela Flint, whose keen eyes rarely missed a detail. Alice Mullen, loyal and solid as a weathered oak. They had laid their trust on the table, risking the possibility that the Targaryens might bring war instead of salvation. But they must have reasons to believe that uniting against the looming threat was worth such risk. As dusk draped the city once more, Daenerys found a quiet corner of the estate to collect her thoughts. A small alcove near a mosaic depicting dragons in flight over rolling hills. She sank onto a bench, letting her gaze roam over the artwork's colorful tiles. Perhaps her ancestors had once soared over Westeros, uniting it under one banner. Now, she and her brother would traverse that same sea to meet a great house that once fought to end Targaryen rule. The world had turned upside down. She did not see Viserys for the rest of the evening. Rumors among the servants whispered that he had demanded a private dinner in his chambers. Daenerys was content to let him stew if it meant they avoided another confrontation. Instead, she joined the northern envoys for a modest supper in one of the smaller dining rooms. They spoke lightly of the journey ahead, the possibility of storms, the cost of provisions. Not once did they speak of the Iron Throne or old betrayals. The conversation was almost, dare she say it, peaceful. She found herself relaxing in their presence, grateful for the calm after so many nights of anxiety. Afterward, she walked them to their suite, wishing them a good night. Roderick lingered a moment after Gela and Halla stepped inside. He looked at Daenerys, hesitated, then spoke softly. I can see the weight you carry. You have a kind heart, princess. I only hope your brother realizes it as well. She bowed her head, a flush creeping across her cheeks. Thank you, Roderick. I appreciate your kindness." With a small nod, he disappeared into the suite, leaving Daenerys to the hush of the corridor. She took a deep breath and made her way back to her own chambers. The tapestries on the wall seemed to sway in the torchlight. She felt a glimmer of something unfamiliar. Was it hope? The next few days passed in a blur of final arrangements. Daenerys oversaw the packing of clothes, the selection of dried goods, and fresh supplies for the voyage. Illyrio's scribes drew up lists of items that might be needed in the north, from medicines to spices. Viserys busied himself with ensuring enough armed men would accompany him. Though it was a small retinue, hardly more than a handful, Daenerys understood that Illyrio had hired them from among local sellswords, carefully choosing men he deemed trustworthy. She had only a few private moments with her brother during that time. Each time their words were terse, overshadowed by mutual apprehension. But he did not forbid her from coming. He did not lash out. Perhaps that was the best she could hope for. On the eve before they were to depart, Daenerys stood on a balcony overlooking the harbor. From this vantage, she could see the mast of the ship that had been chosen for them. It was not especially grand, but it was sturdy, Illyrio assured them, with a seasoned crew. The hold was deep enough for cargo, and for whatever gear the Northerners had brought. Beside it, she saw another smaller vessel that would carry additional supplies. The tide glimmered in the moonlight, and gulls cried restlessly, their silhouettes fluttering against a starlit sky. She heard footsteps behind her. Turning, she found Viserys, silent and somber. He joined her at the balcony rail, gazing out at the ships. A breeze ruffled his pale hair. "Tomorrow we leave this place," he said at length, his voice low. "It's strange. I've dreamed of crossing the narrow sea my whole life, yet not like this, not to the north." Daenerys rested her hands on the balustrade. "It may not be the path we envisioned, but it's still a path to Westeros." He gave a short laugh. "True enough. Perhaps it's fate. Father always spoke of destiny. Maybe the gods have chosen to test us." She looked at his profile in the moonlight, saw the tension carved into his features. "We can't know the gods' will," she murmured. "We can only move forward. Brother, I hope." She hesitated, then pressed on. "I hope that once we reach White Harbor you'll trust in Ned Stark's honor. I believe they mean us no harm." His jaw clenched. Then, to her surprise, he sighed softly. "You trust them more than I do. But I suppose I must rely on your instincts as well. You were always the gentler one, reading hearts where I only see threats." The admission startled her. She laid a tentative hand on his arm. "We have to support each other. This is our chance to truly gain a foothold in Westeros. Let's not squander it." He turned to meet her gaze. In his eyes, she thought she glimpsed the brother she remembered from her earliest childhood memories, before exile twisted him with anger and fear. "We'll try," he said simply. They stood in silence for a moment, the night enveloping them with a salty breeze. Then Viserys stepped away. "I have more to do. Prepare yourself, Daenerys. The morning will come quickly." She nodded, watching him retreat into the shadows of the corridor. A faint ache lingered in her chest, a tangle of yearning and uncertainty. At least he had spoken to her without rancor. Perhaps it was the closest they could come to reconciliation. For now. When she finally returned to her room, she found her traveling chest already packed, her new furs and cloaks neatly folded. A single candle flickered on the table, sending dancing shadows across the walls. As she slipped under the sheets of her bed, she let her eyes linger on the chest. Inside lay the garments that would shield her from northern cold. Inside lay the next stage of her life, waiting for the tide to carry her. She slept fitfully, dreaming of waves lapping at a wooden hull, of wolves running across ice, of a dragon curled in the snow. When morning's light pried her eyes open, she rose without delay, heart pounding with an edge of excitement and trepidation. The day had come. She was going home, though not to the place she had once imagined. Still, it was Westeros, and that alone made her breath catch. She dressed in a sturdy gown, laced boots, and a light cloak. Jiki helped pin her hair in a practical style, braids coiled at the back of her head. Her reflection in the mirror looked different now. No longer the timid girl waiting for her brother's mood. She had a new purpose, a chance to shape her fate. With a final glance at the chambers that had once been her prison and refuge, she stepped out into the hallway. The estate buzzed with activity. Servants carrying trunks, guards checking weapons, Illyrio bustling about in a swirl of silks. Daenerys joined the Northerners, who stood near the front entrance, each carrying a small pack. They were dressed for travel in leathers and cloaks that would better suit a cold climate. Viserys came striding down the corridor, his retinue at his heels, tension written in every line of his body. Illyrio approached them, arms open in farewell. "Ah, my dear friends, may the seas treat you kindly. I will pray for calm winds and gentle skies." Viserys gave a curt nod, not bothering to hide his impatience. Daenerys, however, offered Illyrio a genuine, if small, smile. "Thank you, Magister. You have been a gracious host, and I hope one day to repay your kindness." Illyrio's eyes gleamed with ambition. "Then I look forward to that day, Princess." Without further delay, they exited the estate, stepping into the early morning sun. The streets leading to the harbor were not yet packed, though merchants were beginning to set up stalls. They traveled on horseback, a short ride, with Illyria's guards accompanying them until they reached the docks. At the harbor, Daenerys caught sight of the ship, the Stormcaser, the crew loading casks and crates with methodical efficiency. The captain, a lean Pentoshi with sun-seamed skin, greeted them respectfully, promising safe passage. Roderick Castle conversed with him in low tones, verifying final details. Viserys stalked to the gangplank, surveying the vessel with a critical eye. Daenerys took a moment to inhale the tang of sea air, letting the smell of salt and tar fill her senses. Gela Flint and Hallis Mullen stood nearby, glancing up at the ship's rigging. Hallis spat into the water, murmuring something about favorable tides. Gela merely watched the bustle with a thoughtful air, her breath visible in faint puffs against the morning chill. Servants hauled the last trunk aboard, and soon it was time to board. Daenerys placed her hand on the wooden railing, feeling the gentle sway beneath her feet as she stepped onto the ship. Behind her, she heard Illyrio's men bidding them farewell. Viserys came up next, scowling at the groan of the planks. The Northmen boarded as well, their expressions set with quiet resolve. Daenerys looked back at Pentos, at the worn stones of the dock, the receding figure of Illyrio Mopatis with his rings and finery. She did not feel sorrow at leaving. Instead, a thrill coursed through her. She let the wind catch a loose strand of her silver hair, lifting her gaze to the horizon. The anchor was lifted. The sails were unfurled, snapping sharply in the breeze. Crewmen hurried about, calling orders in their thick Essosi accents. The Stormcaser eased away from the wharf, drifting into the open harbor. Daenerys braced herself against the ship's railing, heart thumping as the city slipped further behind. Soon, they cleared the breakwater, and the vessel began to rise and fall with the larger swells. She glanced at her brother. He clutched the railing, jaw set, as though trying to master the queasiness that came with a ship's motion. The Northmen spread out across the deck, each finding their sea legs in their own way. Roderick kept a watchful eye on the horizon. Gela took in every detail with solemn interest, and Hallis offered quiet jokes to a deckhand who responded with a grin. Daenerys exhaled, letting her own body sway with the gentle pitch of the vessel. To the west lay a vast expanse of water, shimmering under the morning sun. On the other side of that water was White Harbor, and beyond that, Winterfell. She stared into that distance, with a sense of both apprehension and wonder. This was real. They were on their way, forging an alliance that might change the fate of the Seven Kingdoms, or fail spectacularly. The ship's prow cut through the waves, carrying them ever closer to the land she had never truly known. The gulls wheeled overhead, their cries echoing like distant horns. Daenerys straightened her back, the wind tugging at her cloak. In her mind, she pictured the wide ramparts of Winterfell, the gray stones, the banners of House Stark snapping in a bitter wind. Soon, she told herself, she would see it with her own eyes. No matter the fear gnawing at her, no matter the uncertainty swirling in her brother's heart, they were bound now to this course. She felt the threads of destiny tightening around her, pulling her onward. If the North could become her ally before ever she set foot in the southern courts, perhaps she stood a chance to save the realm from whatever terrors lay beyond the wall, and perhaps in doing so, reclaim the honor of House Targaryen. Clinging to that fragile hope, Daenerys lifted her face to the sun, let the sea wind kiss her cheeks, and closed her eyes for a moment. She thought of dragons on the wing and wolves in the snow. She whispered a silent promise that she would do what she must to protect the living, that she would become more than the ghost of a fallen dynasty. She opened her eyes again, focused on the horizon, and felt her heart surge with the ship's rhythm. They were sailing west, into a future as treacherous and vast as the sea. But there was no turning back now. The first days at sea passed in a blur of rolling waves and rattling timbers, each swell a reminder that their journey was no mere whim. Daenerys stood at the bow most mornings, bracing herself against the ship's gentle lurch, letting the wind course through her hair. The storm chaser was sturdy but hardly luxurious, its sails patched in a few places, the deck planks worn by countless voyages. Still, the crew carried themselves with a confidence that told her the vessel had weathered far worse. Roderick Castle often joined her, arms folded as he gazed out over the water. He said little, but occasionally he'd point out subtle shifts in the wind or the shape of a cloud on the horizon. She would nod, welcoming even that small companionship in the midst of so much uncertainty. While the sea appeared infinite and empty, the sense of direction and purpose burned within her. Each league westward brought her closer to the land she had never truly known. Viserys avoided the bow altogether, preferring the shelter of the aft deck or his cramped cabin. He had never sailed before, and seasickness gnawed at his pride. At midday, Daenerys heard him berating a deckhand who'd nearly spilled a bucket of water near him. She tried not to let the tension sour her stomach. She had enough to worry about on her own. Jella Flint and Hallis Mullen took the rough conditions more stoically. She would sometimes see them standing by the rail, conferring quietly, scanning the horizon as if expecting trouble. Their second night aboard, the wind rose. Clouds gathered in a bruised sky at dusk, and by nightfall, the ship lurched in a heavy chop. Lightning flashed in the distance. Most of the crew stayed on deck, shouting to one another as they trimmed the sails, securing loose ropes. Daenerys felt the storm chaser heel beneath her feet with every gust of wind. She pressed her palm against a bulkhead for balance, heart racing at each thunderclap. She was making her way toward her cabin when she caught sight of her brother. He stood near the wheel, gripping the railing to keep steady. Rain lashed across the deck in slanting sheets, drenching his hair and clothes. The dim lantern light revealed his face, pale and tense. Daenerys approached slowly, water running in rivulets down her arms. "Brother," she called over the roar of wind and crashing waves. "Come below. You'll catch your death out here." He gave a short, harsh laugh, as if the thought of seeking shelter was beneath him. "The storm isn't enough to kill a dragon," he shouted back, though even across the short distance, his voice sounded shaky. "I won't cower while these Northmen watch me." She stepped closer, bracing herself against the tilt of the ship. "There's no shame in sheltering from the storm. They're probably below too." His gaze flicked to the far side of the deck, where Jella Flint stood with a coil of rope slung over her shoulder, helping a deckhand tie down a loose spar. Hallis Mullen was at the opposite rail, hauling on a line with 3 sailors. Roderick was out of sight, likely helping elsewhere, but Daenerys knew these northerners faced the weather without complaint. Viserys' pride would not let him retreat below while they endured the gale. Daenerys exhaled, realizing any further argument would be wasted. She grabbed hold of a nearby rope and steadied herself, resigning to keep him in sight. The wind howled, and a particularly vicious wave sent the ship pitching to one side, hurling seawater across the deck. She clenched her jaw and prayed that the storm would pass quickly. It raged into the night, thunder shaking the timbers, rain hammering the sails. The storm chaser struggled on. Daenerys finally sought refuge in her cabin, though sleep came only in snatches as the vessel tossed. Sometime before dawn, the gale began to ease. By the time pale morning light penetrated her cabin's small porthole, the rain had slowed to a steady drizzle. She emerged on deck to find the crew exhausted but relieved. The sails hung loose while the captain and a few sailors made repairs. Viserys stood near the mainmast, hair plastered to his skull, eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. He wore a raw, weary scowl, and at his feet lay a battered length of rope, half unraveled during the night. Gela Flint passed close by, offering him a curt nod. Daenerys couldn't read her expression. Somewhere between respect and wariness. Roderick caught Daenerys' eye. He looked no less tired, but he managed a faint smile. "It seems we've weathered it," he said quietly. "We lost a bit of canvas, but the hull's intact. By the gods, I thought we might capsize a time or two." She managed a shaky laugh. "I prayed more in the last few hours than I have in my entire life." They shared a moment of relieved silence. Around them, the deckhands slogged through puddles, coiling ropes and checking for damage. Water still dripped from the rigging, but the sky was slowly brightening. The days that followed were calmer. As the ship resumed a steady course, Daenerys found a kind of rhythm. She rose at dawn to take tea with Roderick or Hallis, discussing small nothings, a gesture she supposed, to ease the tension between Targaryen and Stark loyalists. Viserys would sometimes appear late, eyes heavy-lidded, complaining of the watery porridge or the stale ship's biscuits. Gela kept mostly to herself, though she nodded courteously whenever Daenerys passed. Even with the tension, an unspoken camaraderie formed against the shared hardship of travel. They were well into their second week at sea when land sightings became sporadic. Just small rocky isles, or the distant shape of a passing merchant galley. The captain assured them this was normal, as they angled north. Sometimes at midday, Daenerys would see shapes in the water. Porpoises, or once, a group of whales spouting near the horizon. She called Roderick over when she spotted them, and he gave a small, boyish grin at the sight. Each afternoon the wind turned colder, a briny chill in the air that signaled their creeping approach to northern latitudes. Daenerys began wearing a thicker cloak, clutching it around her shoulders on deck. Each day, she could see her breath forming small clouds before her face, a novelty after so many years in hot, sun-drenched lands. Viserys complained bitterly, demanding braziers in his cabin, which the crew tried to accommodate with only partial success. One evening, she found Hallis Malin perched on a barrel near the stern, fishing pole in hand, a line trailing off into the darkening sea. He gave a polite shrug when she asked if he was catching anything. "Been at it half an hour and they ain't biting," he said, "but a man can hope." She watched him from a short distance. Moonlight silvered the waves, and the storm chaser cut a gentle path through them, sails half furled for the night. Gela Flint sat cross-legged nearby, her back against a coil of rope, humming a quiet tune that Daenerys didn't recognize. At times like this, Daenerys felt a pang of loneliness. She was surrounded by people yet caught between her brother's anger and the Northerners' cautious courtesy. She longed for someone with whom she could speak freely, unburden her heart. She tried not to think of what might await them once they reached White Harbor. Would Lord Stark truly meet them in peace? Would her brother be able to restrain his resentment? The next morning brought a shift in the wind that carried them faster. The captain announced that if the weather held, they might sight the northern coast in 2 or 3 days. A ripple of excitement went through the travelers. Even Viserys seemed heartened by the prospect of stepping onto solid ground, though Daenerys knew he dreaded the moment he'd have to face strangers in a city sworn to House Stark. Roderick Castle approached Daenerys after the midday meal, clearing his throat politely. "Princess, might you walk with me a moment?" She set aside her cup of watered wine, rising. "Of course." They moved to a quiet stretch of the deck, where crates were stacked and secured with netting. The midday sun was pale behind a layer of cloud. Daenerys drew her cloak tighter. Roderick leaned against a crate, arms crossed. "We're nearing the north now, so I thought it wise to speak. When we arrive in White Harbor, we'll likely be welcomed by Lord Wyman, Manderley's people. He's a loyal bannerman of House Stark, but also a gracious host. I've no doubt he'll offer comforts, a feast perhaps. But it's important to know that White Harbor, despite being in the north, is not quite as severe as Winterfell. They have some southern customs, even worship the Seven, as well as the old gods." Daenerys listened intently. "I've heard that House Manderley used to live in the south once, that they keep the faith of the Seven. So you're telling me it might feel more like King's Landing than Winterfell?" Roderick allowed a small chuckle. "Not quite. The Manderleys still think of themselves as proud northerners, but White Harbor is a hub for trade. You might find it less grim than you expect, but it is still loyal to Winterfell. You can expect them to judge you by how you present yourself." "And this how?" She dipped her head. "I understand. And how do you recommend we present ourselves?" He pressed his lips together in thought. "With humility, above all. We have no illusions about your claim. You are Targaryens, yes, but you have no armies behind you at the moment. My lord's invitation is an olive branch. Show White Harbor that you come to help, not to conquer, and they'll be more inclined to welcome you. Some might remember the Mad King's cruelty, but most will look to how you comport yourselves now." "Oh." She appreciated his candor. "You speak plainly as always." "Thank you, Roderick. I'll do my best. I can't promise the same for my brother's temper, but I will keep him in check as best I can." He nodded, sympathy shining behind the tired lines of his face. "That's all we can ask. Lord Stark is not blind to the complexities here. We only hope to prove that the North has no interest in retribution, not if you're willing to see the greater threat." Nah. She sensed there was more on his mind, but he seemed reluctant to delve further. Perhaps he, like her, feared the unknown shape of the threat beyond the wall. Instead, she thanked him again and drifted away, letting him return to whatever business he had. That afternoon, Daenerys sought out Gella Flint, finding her atop the forecastle, scanning the horizon with a spyglass. The wind tugged at Gella's cropped hair, and the faint scars on her forearms spoke of a life hardened by rough edges. Yet there was a calm about her that Daenerys found oddly reassuring. She stepped forward, lifting a hand in greeting. Gella lowered the spyglass. "Princess." Daenerys leaned against the rail, gazing at the endless ocean. "I wanted to thank you for helping with the storm that first night. I saw you guiding the crew. You seemed to know what you were doing." A shrug. "I've been on ships before. Northmen sometimes sail to the Sisters, or even to Essos on trade errands. I'm no expert, but I know a line from a halyard." "Nana." Daenerys nodded, letting a quiet lull settle. "I appreciate your patience with my brother as well. He can be difficult." Gella exhaled. "He's proud, we see that, but he's endured much, I'm sure." "Too much, perhaps," Daenerys said softly. "Sometimes I wonder if it's taken a toll on him that can't be undone." The woman studied Daenerys, eyes narrowed. "And on you." Daenerys hesitated, swirling her thoughts. "We all bear scars. My hope is that we can find a way to heal them, rather than tear them open again." "Menon?" A faint smile ghosted across Gella's lips, and she returned her gaze to the ocean. They said no more, but Daenerys left that short conversation feeling a little less alone. On the 17th day of their journey, the Storm Chasers' captain announced they were nearing the Bight, the broad bay that curled along the eastern coast of the north. The weather had grown progressively colder, the sky often overcast. Viserys stayed in his cabin much of the time, only emerging to pace the deck with a scowl. The crew began to speak of landfall. They rummaged out heavier cloaks and gloves, well aware the northern climate could be merciless even in a milder season. Roderick and his companions spent hours at the bow, scanning for the first glimpse of the shore. Finally, near midday, Daenerys heard a shout from one of the sailors perched on the rigging. She rushed forward and found Roderick there, peering into the distance. He smiled, lines crinkling around his eyes. "Look, Princess, to the northwest. See that haze on the horizon?" She followed his gesture, narrowing her eyes. It appeared as a dim smudge of gray against a paler gray sky, almost imperceptible at first. But as she watched, she realized it was the faint outline of land, a rugged coastline stretching away. A strange sensation tightened her chest. This was Westeros, truly Westeros, her birthplace, though she had no memories of it. Soon, the coast grew clearer, revealing rocky cliffs that plunged into the sea, topped by hardy grasses bent in the wind. The water here had a colder hue, more slate than turquoise. Salt spray peppered the air. Even the waves seemed differently shaped, rolling in slower, heavier swells. Gulls circled, their cries carrying on the wind. Viserys emerged from his cabin, cloak wrapped around him, eyes sharp with apprehension. He stared at the distant shoreline, as though expecting it to sprout spears. Daenerys touched his arm gently, but he shook her off. He would face this moment alone, proud to the last. The stormcasers steered westward along the coast, staying several leagues out, passing rocky promontories and small coves. Occasionally, they glimpsed a lonely watchtower or a patch of farmland carved into the slopes. The captain charted their course carefully, for the waters bristled with hidden reefs. As the day waned, they saw the lights of fishing boats on the horizon, tiny glimmers in the dusk. They pressed on. They spent another night at sea, the coastline a dark line against the starlit sky. Roderick assured everyone they were close enough that by the next day, they should see the mouth of the White Knife, the river that led to White Harbor. Daenerys barely slept, heart fluttering with anticipation. She rose before dawn, pacing the deck, hugging a fur-lined cloak to her shoulders. The sun broke over the waves with a pearly light. By mid-morning, they rounded a broad headland, and there in the distance rose the glimmer of white walls. Daenerys drew a sharp breath. White Harbor. She could make out the shape of a harbor bristling with ships. A castle perched at the mouth of the river, and beyond it, the city rising in tiers along the bank. The stormcasers slowed as they neared the harbor mouth. The gulls grew more numerous, wheeling overhead and diving for scraps. Fishing vessels and cargo cogs passed them. Some smaller craft, looking at the stormchaser with open curiosity. Roderick and Yella conferred with the captain about signaling their peaceful intent. Hallis Mullen stood at the prow, scanning for the city's defenders. Soon, a long, narrow boat approached them from the harbor, bearing the green and white banner of House Manderley, a white merman on a teal field. A group of armored men sat at the oars. Their leader stood at the bow, calling out a challenge. The stormcaser's captain answered with a wave and a shouted explanation that they bore envoys of House Stark and guests from Essos. The officer on the longboat examined them warily, then directed the stormchaser to follow him into the harbor. Daenerys joined her brother at the rail, watching as the city drew nearer. White Harbor looked unlike any place she had seen. Its walls gleamed pale in the daylight, heavy battlements broken by gatehouses and towers. Beyond the walls, she glimpsed buildings of timber and stone, some topped with pointed roofs that reminded her of stories of the north. Overlooking everything was a grand keep, its windows reflecting the sunlight. Flags bearing House Manderley's colors fluttered from ramparts. They eased into a berth along one of the stone docks. Workers in thick cloaks scurried to tie off the stormcaser, while the city's guards kept watch. Daenerys saw more than a few curious faces peering at them from behind barrels or crates, some whispering to each other. The chill in the air nipped at her nose and cheeks. She pulled her cloak tighter, trying to appear calm despite the swirl of nerves in her gut. Viserys disembarked first, stepping gingerly onto the dock, accompanied by the handful of sellswords Illyrio had provided. Roderick followed with Yella and Hallis, each stepping with confidence, their boots striking the damp stones. Daenerys descended the gangplank last, her heart hammering. She felt the eyes of dozens of Northmen upon her as she set foot on Westerosi soil for the first time since she was a babe. An official in a warm doublet, bearing House Manderley's sigil on his breast, approached them with a short bow. "Welcome to White Harbor. I am Thomas Manderley, cousin to Lord Wyman. We received word by Raven that envoys would arrive, but did not expect you so soon." His gaze flicked between Roderick and Viserys. "We have prepared rooms at the new castle for you. Lord Wyman will grant you an audience this evening." Roderick stepped forward, returning the bow. "Thank you. On behalf of Lord Stark, we appreciate your hospitality." He gestured to Daenerys and Viserys. "These are our distinguished guests, Prince Viserys Targaryen and Princess Daenerys Targaryen." Thomas' expression flickered at the mention of Targaryens, but his training in courtesy held. He bowed again, deeper this time. "Welcome, Prince and Princess. We are at your service. Please allow my men to guide you to the castle so you may rest." Viserys inclined his head stiffly. "Very well." A small party of Manderley guards formed up around them, leading the way off the docks. Daenerys felt a hush settle among the harbor folk who had gathered to stare. Some seemed merely curious, but a few faces held open distrust. She fixed her gaze ahead, following Roderick's broad back, trying to project calm grace. The Sellswords flanked Viserys while Jella and Hallis remained close, scanning for any sign of threat. They passed through a wide gate in the city wall and entered White Harbor's lower district. Narrow cobblestone streets, lined with half-timbered houses and shops, sloped upward. Merchants sold salted fish, fresh bread, warm furs. Daenerys smelled yeast and brine, a not unpleasant combination. Townspeople paused in their activities to watch the peculiar procession, a Targaryen prince and princess in the company of northern envoys. She caught snippets of whispers, the words, dragon and Stark, repeated in hushed tones. Thomas led them on toward the higher part of the city, where the buildings grew grander. The architecture blended northern sturdiness with southern flourishes. White stone predominated, so bright it nearly glowed under the midday sun. At last they reached a second set of walls enclosing the Manderley's seat, known as the New Castle. Though it looked venerable enough to Daenerys' eye, they crossed a drawbridge over a moat fed by the White Knife River, the water reflecting the pale walls above. Inside the courtyard, servants bustled to take their cloaks, stable their horses, and carry in baggage from the ship. Daenerys stood in the crisp air, studying the tall keep with its ornate carvings of mermaids and fish. Even the city's architecture felt like a subtle union of the north and the sea. Thomas bowed once more, gesturing to a wide set of stairs. Lord Wyman awaits you inside, should you wish to greet him now. Or we can show you to your rooms first. Some prefer to refresh themselves after a sea voyage. Viserys opened his mouth as if to speak sharply, but Daenerys was quicker. A moment to refresh ourselves would be most welcome, she said gently. We've been at sea for many days. We'd like to make a proper appearance when we meet Lord Wyman. Thomas smiled, nodding his agreement. Roderick murmured a quiet thanks, then beckoned for his companions to follow. The group ascended the steps into the keep. Within, Daenerys found broad corridors paneled with pale wood, the floors laid with flagstones that gave off a faint echo with every step. Tapestries depicting nautical scenes hung from the walls. One showed a stylized sea battle, another a grand feast with sea creatures woven into the table's designs. Servants led Daenerys to a comfortable chamber with a small fireplace, the walls painted in a soft cream hue. She stepped inside, exhaling relief at the warmth radiating from the hearth. A four-post bed stood near the wall, draped in furs rather than the silks she had known in Essos. A basin of fresh water awaited her, along with a bowl of rose-scented soap. She unfastened her cloak, letting it drop onto a nearby chair, and removed her gloves. Outside, she heard the click of footsteps as the others found their rooms. She sank onto the edge of the bed, running her hands over the thick fur covering, marveling at the strangeness of it all. She was in Westeros, a guest of House Manderley, under the protection of House Stark's envoys. A place she'd never imagined she might stand before, forging alliances with the Southern Lords, yet here she was. She rinsed her face in the basin, relishing the cool water. It seemed more bracing, more alive than water in Pentos. She dried her skin on a soft towel and stepped to the window. The view overlooked a courtyard garden, bare-limbed trees standing in neat rows. Beyond the walls she could see the city's rooftops descending toward the harbor, and a slice of blue-gray sea shimmering in the distance. She stood there a long moment, letting the reality seep into her bones. This was no dream. She felt the chill air on her cheeks, smelled the faint tang of salt from the open window. With a decisive breath, she turned to the clothes that had been unpacked for her. She selected a gown of thick gray wool with discreet silver embroidery, a subtle nod to her Targaryen heritage without flaunting it too boldly. She pinned back her silver hair, leaving a single braid to drape over one shoulder. When at last she emerged into the corridor, she found Jella Flint waiting. The northern woman had removed her traveling gear in favor of a simpler leather doublet, her fur collar neatly brushed. She inclined her head. Roderick asked me to see if you needed anything before we proceed to the hall. Lord Wayman's steward has prepared an antechamber for our official greeting. Daenerys offered a polite smile. Thank you, Jella. I'm ready. They walked through the passages together. The walls here were hung with banners. The Merman of House Manderley, interspersed with the direwolf of House Dark. Bright torches lit the hall, their flames dancing in the draught. Daenerys was aware of faint music drifting from some distant chamber, likely minstrels preparing for the evening's feast. The sense of roast meat and spiced wine teased at the air. They found Roderick, Hallis, and Viserys in a small reception area outside a pair of double doors carved with aquatic motifs. Viserys looked tense, dressed in his best black tunic with red trim. He fiddled with a silver dragon pin at his collar, refusing to meet Daenerys' eyes. Roderick, on the other hand, looked calm. He murmured instructions to a Manderly steward before turning to Daenerys and Jella. "Lord Wyman awaits us," Roderick said. "He wished to greet us privately before any public audience." Viserys skeked. "Yes, if we're not worth announcing in his grand hall." Daenerys stepped forward, speaking gently. "This may be a courtesy. He might not wish to draw attention yet, not until he's certain of our purpose." Viserys made a low sound in his throat, but said nothing else. The steward bowed and pushed open the double doors, ushering them inside. The antechamber was smaller than Daenerys expected, but warmly lit by a roaring fireplace. A large table sat in the center, laden with fresh bread, cheese, and flagons of wine. Chairs lined the walls. And there, standing with the help of a cane, was Lord Wyman Manderly, a massive man with a broad belly, a double chin, and a jovial, pink-cheeked face. His hair was thinning and white, giving him the look of an aging patriarch who had once been formidable. Two attendants stood behind him, each bearing Manderly livery. Roderick bowed deeply. "My lord, thank you for welcoming us." Wyman Manderly smiled, his cheeks creasing. "Roderick Castle, I trust your journey was not too harrowing. Though from the talk at the docks, I hear you endured a fierce storm." "Bending more. We weathered it, my lord." Roderick stepped aside, gesturing to Daenerys and Viserys. "May I present Prince Viserys Targaryen and Princess Daenerys Targaryen of House Targaryen." A flicker of complexity passed over Wyman's features. Surprise, curiosity, perhaps a cautious respect. Then he inclined his head with a certain grace. "Prince, Princess, welcome to White Harbor. I am Wyman Manderly, vassal to Lord Eddard Stark of Winterfell. I offer you my hospitality and protection while you remain our guests." "Now," Viserys gave the barest nod, his tone clipped. "Lord Manderly, we thank you for your courtesy." Daenerys forced a soft smile, stepping forward. "My lord, it is our honor to be here. Your city is as grand as I've heard, and we're grateful for your willingness to receive us." Wyman tapped his cane on the floor, waving off any formality. "We do our best to keep a fine table and a warm hearth. You shall have both, I assure you." His gaze flicked to Roderick. "As for the nature of this visit, I understand Lord Stark himself will be arriving soon. He sent word to expect him within a fortnight." Roderick nodded. "Yes, my lord. That is our plan. We will wait here in White Harbor until Lord Stark can join us, so we may proceed together to Winterfell if that pleases him." Viserys' lips tightened at the mention of waiting, but he held his tongue. Wyman gestured to the table. "We might discuss the particulars over a cup of wine. I've had a cask brought up from the cellars. It's a Dornish vintage if you care for something robust. Or, if you prefer something local, we have fine ales." "Bentamma." Daenerys exchanged a look with Viserys, then nodded graciously. "Wine would be lovely, my lord." "Thank you." They settled around the table. One of the attendants poured for each of them, the dark red liquid filling the cups with a heady aroma. Daenerys found a seat where she could observe both her brother and Wyman Manderly. Jella Flint and Hallis Mullen stood back, letting Roderick speak for the North. The Sellswords who had accompanied Viserys remained outside, presumably at the steward's instructions. Wyman raised his cup in a sort of toast. To new arrivals and safe journeys. They all drank, and Daenerys noted Viserys took a long sip, perhaps seeking courage in the taste. Wyman set his cup down, eyes bright. "If I may be frank, Prince and Princess, your presence here is unexpected. We do not often see Targaryens in the north, especially not since the end of the war." Viserys' brow twitched, but Daenerys answered smoothly. "We understand it must be surprising. Circumstances have changed. The north faces a threat beyond the wall. So we are told. House Targaryen wishes to help, if we can. Noun. Wyman's gaze went to Roderick. I see. Lord Stark's words of caution about the threat are not idle then? Roderick's voice was steady. We've had reports from the Night's Watch. Lord Stark is convinced that more than wildlings roam those wastes. We can no longer ignore the old tales, not with so many signs. Wyman's normally jovial face darkened slightly. I must confess, I hear rumors as well. Fisherfolk speak of spirits in the night, strange lights in the northern sky. I do not know what to believe. But if Eddard Stark is concerned, then I will heed his counsel. Dialim. Viserys straightened. Then you know the realm cannot be left to a complacent king. Robert Baratheon won't lift a finger to help if he thinks it's all myth. He'd sooner hunt stags and drink himself into a stupor. Wyman's cheeks colored. Whether from the Dornish wine or Viserys' bold words, Daenerys could not tell. But he responded in a measured tone. King Robert has his flaws, to be sure. But the North has never been the most favored region in his eyes. If this threat is real, we might indeed need allies beyond the throne. Daenerys seized the moment, softening her voice. That is why we come, my lord. House Targaryen, if it is to rise again, will not do so solely by force. We seek to protect the realm, for all who live in it. She felt her brother's eyes on her, but she pressed on. We do not deny the tragedies of the past, but we look to the future, and Lord Stark has agreed that if the threat is real, all must stand together. Wyman inclined his head, his jowls quivering slightly. I cannot speak for every man in the North, but I can say that if Eddard Stark stands beside you, many will listen. He is well loved, even here in White Harbor. We remember how he ended the Greyjoy Rebellion, how he fosters peace. Viserys' nostrils flared, perhaps recalling that Ned Stark once fought Targaryens as well. But he nodded curtly. Then let him come. We'll speak face to face. Wyman gave a warm, placating smile. Yes, indeed. We shall host you in the meantime. You are welcome to walk the city. Enjoy our meals. Speak with our knights and merchants, if you wish. Rest assured, you have nothing to fear within these walls. He paused, glancing between them. But pray be mindful. Some folk have long memories of the war. There may be whispers or wary looks. I'll do my best to maintain order. Daenerys bowed her head. We understand. Thank you, Lord Wyman. The conversation drifted to lighter topics. The quality of White Harbor's fish markets, the shipping routes, even a brief mention of the city's famed meat pies. Wyman Manderley perked up at that, waxing poetic about the pies served in his feasting hall. Daenerys smiled politely, though her mind churned. The real test would come with Ned Stark's arrival. She suspected none of this would matter if Eddard Stark decided the risk of trusting Targaryens was too great. Before long, the small audience ended. Wyman said he would have a feast prepared that evening to honor the travelers. Thomas Manderley led them back into the corridor, promising to show them around the keep and the courtyard if they wished. Viserys declined with a tight shrug, muttering something about resting in his chambers. Roderick and the others dispersed, eager to wash away the salt of the sea. Daenerys lingered, gazing at the high vaulted ceiling of the corridor. The presence of thick stone overhead reminded her she was no longer in a city of marble arches and exotic tapestries. This was a land shaped by wind and cold. Everything felt heavier, more grounded. She touched the stone wall, brushing her fingertips along its rough surface. These stones were older than she could fathom, layered with centuries of memory. Now, she had become part of their story, however small. Eventually, she followed a servant to explore the courtyard, wrapping her cloak around her shoulders. The sky above was gray, and a faint breeze carried the tang of the White Knife River. In the garden, a few patches of winter roses survived, their petals faintly tinged with pink. She stood by them, inhaling their subtle perfume. A swirl of longing rose in her chest. She thought of Rhaegar, her long-dead brother, said to have loved songs and prophecy. Would he have rejoiced to see Targaryen step onto northern soil in peace? Or would he have lamented all that had been lost? She closed her eyes, letting the moment slip by in quiet reflection. When she turned, She found Roderick Castle watching her from a respectful distance. He approached with a courteous nod. "I thought you might be out here," he said gently. "You seem drawn to quiet places." Daenerys lowered her gaze to the roses. "It's been a long journey. I needed a moment to collect myself." He studied her for a moment. "In a day or two, once you've rested, I could show you some of the city if you wish. White Harbor has its own charms, and you might find it enlightening to speak with townsfolk. Many have never met a Targaryen. Your presence alone could sway hearts." "None," she considered. "Yes, that sounds wise. My brother may not be interested, but I'd like to see more of the North with my own eyes." Roderick gave a small, understanding smile. "I'll arrange it." He hesitated, then cleared his throat. "Princess, if I may say, I appreciate how you spoke to Lord Wyman. Your manner is gentle, yet persuasive. It helps us all." She dipped her head in thanks. "I only hope it's enough." He nodded, then excused himself, leaving her alone with the winter roses. Daenerys found her thoughts flitting between doubts and hopes, the swirl of possibility forming in her mind. She had expected to arrive in Westeros with an army, with trumpets proclaiming her name, but here she was, an exile, sheltered by the very house that once helped topple her father. Yet, it did not feel wrong. It felt necessary. That evening, as promised, Lord Wyman hosted a feast in the great hall of the new castle. Long tables groaned under platters of roast pork, fish stews, spiced honey cakes, and flagons of ale and wine. Daenerys and Viserys were given seats of honor near Wyman, with Roderick Castle and the other envoys close by. The warmth of the hall contrasted with the chill outside. Voices echoed off the high ceiling, a mix of northern accents and occasional laughter. Daenerys sampled the famous White Harbor fish pies, finding them buttery and rich. Wyman, pleased by her delight, regaled her with tales of old feasts where he'd served 100 pies at once. Viserys, for his part, sipped wine with an air of restrained impatience, occasionally forcing a polite remark when Wyman addressed him directly. At one point, a troupe of musicians arrived, playing lively tunes that set feet tapping. Some of the younger knights and ladies rose to dance. Daenerys watched the swirling skirts and spinning smiles, a tiny ache forming in her chest. She had never learned the dances of Westeros, only the traditions of Essos. But here, she found an odd longing to join in, to be part of the revelry rather than the perpetual observer. She caught Roderick watching her with a wry grin. He stood, offering her a gallant bow. "Princess, would you do me the honor?" Surprised, she glanced at Viserys, who was scowling at his cup. Then she allowed herself a faint laugh. "I'm afraid I don't know the steps." He shrugged, smile warm. "I can guide you. Besides, no one will care if you miss a step or two." Encouraged by his gentle confidence, she rose and placed her hand in his. He led her onto the cleared space, where a few couples twirled to the music. The tune was bright, accompanied by a flute and a hand drum. Roderick began a simple pattern of steps, and Daenerys followed. She stumbled once, laughing at her own clumsiness, but he caught her arm lightly, steadying her. They circled around in time with the beat, swirling beneath the warm glow of torchlight. She felt eyes upon her. Likely many in the hall were intrigued or suspicious. Here was a Targaryen princess dancing with a Stark retainer. But, in that moment, she set aside the weight of suspicion and simply let the music carry her. Her blood rushed, cheeks warming in the glow. Roderick steered her through a spin, her silver hair catching the flicker of the flames. When the tune ended, she found herself slightly breathless, her heart light. They returned to the table amid applause. Viserys wore a strained expression. Daenerys sat, smoothing her gown. Jella Flint offered her a rare smile, as if acknowledging that Daenerys had done something good by mingling with the Northerner. Lord Wyman chuckled, clapping his hands. "Lovely, lovely. Perhaps we'll see the prince take the floor next." Viserys' nostrils flared. "I think not," he muttered, taking another gulp of wine. Daenerys gently patted his hand. "Brother, let's not spoil the mood," she said softly. She hoped no one else overheard. He pulled his hand away. "I'm in no mood for prancing," he said under his breath. But he did not storm off, and for that, Daenerys was grateful. The feast continued, the music shifting to slower ballads. By the time the evening wound down, Daenerys felt a drowsy fullness from the rich food and wine. Servants cleared away plates, and the hall began to empty. Wyman Manderley stood, bidding them all good night, and reminding Viserys and Daenerys that they were welcome to remain as long as they needed. The older man departed, leaning on his cane, attended by a few knights. Viserys rose abruptly, ignoring Roderick's attempt at a cordial farewell. Daenerys watched him slip from the hall, shoulders tight. She considered following but decided to let him brood in peace. Instead, she thanked Roderick for the dance, then excused herself to find her chamber. As she walked through the corridors, the castle felt both comforting and strange, filled with the hush of night and the distant murmur of departing guests. Torches flickered in wall sconces, casting dancing shadows. She breathed in the faint scent of pine that must have drifted from the forest beyond the city walls. In her room, she let the fire's glow warm her. A servant helped her out of her gown, and she slipped into a woolen nightdress. The furs on the bed looked inviting, but she found herself standing at the window instead, peering at the moonlit skyline of White Harbor. A hush lay over the city, the streets lit only by the occasional torch or lantern. In the harbor below, ships rocked gently, their masts like spindly fingers in the night. She wondered what her brother thought of all this. Had he any sense of wonder, or only a gnawing bitterness that the North did not kneel at once? Would Ned Stark arrive soon? And if so, would it end in an alliance or a fresh conflict? Daenerys rested her forehead against the cool glass, her breath fogging it. She closed her eyes, remembering the swirl of the dance, the warmth of friendly smiles, the hush of the city enveloping her now. She thought of old tales, of dragons uniting the kingdoms under one banner. Here, though, she had no dragons, only her name and a cautious trust from these strangers. Perhaps that was enough for now. She allowed herself to imagine a future where the North accepted her, where the realm banded together against a far greater threat than any mortal king. That dream held even a glimmer of truth, then she would cling to it. Finally, she turned from the window, letting the chill slip away. She crawled under the blankets and pulled the furs close around her shoulders. Sleep came gently, her mind full of dance steps, swirling banners, and quiet dreams of a tomorrow not yet written. When dawn arrived, she felt renewed purpose stirring in her. The alliance was precarious, but for the first time in her life, she felt she was doing more than chasing the ghosts of Targaryen glory. Here, in the heart of the North, she stood on the edge of something new, fragile but full of promise. With each passing day, the winter roses bloomed beneath a gray sky, and Daenerys prayed that her own hope, too, would survive whatever storms lay ahead.